Chapter 682, A New Evolutionary Path for Kryptonians. What in the universe is happening? General Zod's voice rang out through the cavernous base, heavy with disbelief. Around him, Kryptonian warriors froze in mid-stride, their faces mirroring his confusion. They were no strangers to danger or challenge, but never before had they felt anything like the transformations overtaking their bodies. At first, it was their eyesight that shifted. Where they once depended on state-of-the-art telescopes to study distant star systems, they now perceived those worlds with the naked eye. Planets hundreds of light-years away, once little more than faint smudges, now blazed into focus. They could discern terrain textures, atmospheric hues, even storm fronts swirling in alien skies. It was as if their eyes could cut through cosmic dust and interstellar clouds to gaze straight into the heart of the galaxy. Almost simultaneously, their hearing skyrocketed to unheard-of levels. Every metallic groan of the base's hull, every shuffle of boots against steel decking, even the subtlest hum of distant machinery now registered loud and clear. The warriors flinched at sounds they'd previously ignored, exchanging nervous looks as their heightened senses threatened to overwhelm them. General Zod swallowed and scanned his troops. Each Kryptonian stood rigid, fists clenched at their sides as they struggled to recalibrate to these newfound powers. What kind of evolution had seized them? And what did it mean for the future of their people? As questions swirled through the silent chamber, one thing was certain. Nothing on Krypton, or anywhere else, would ever be the same again. Ethan stood silent in the clearing, and suddenly it was as though the entire planet had pressed itself into his eardrums. He heard the distant crash of ocean waves, the rustling clamor of the forest canopy, even the grinding of rocks far beneath the earth. This uncanny, direct hearing brought every whisper and murmur to him without delay, as if the whole world lay under his command. He could pick out the heartbeat of any creature nearby and feel the steady pulse of life all around him. But that was nothing compared to the power rising within his own veins. It roared like molten steel, swelling and twisting inside him until he felt he might burst. Every muscle in his body hummed with barely contained energy, an internal volcano on the brink of eruption. When he clenched his fist, the air around him quivered and warped. Each breath he drew sent invisible storms rippling outward. In that moment, Ethan realized he was no longer merely a warrior. He had become something far greater, an extraordinary force that transcended mortal limits. Power surged through them, every cell humming with newfound energy. "This is the mark of your Kryptonian heritage," Ethan said, his calm, resonant voice carrying an almost magnetic pull that silenced the crowd. All eyes fixed on him, hungry for answers. He returned their gaze with a knowing smile, his eyes bright with quiet authority. "When you pass under the right star, you awaken your racial abilities. That power is far greater than any technology we've ever built." His words struck like thunder. In that instant, they understood. These astonishing transformations were not random mutations triggered by a strange planet. They were the latent gifts of their Kryptonian blood. Until now, they had believed their mastery of science and engineering would secure their place in the cosmos, perhaps even elevate them above every other race. Yet they'd overlooked the one thing more vital than all their technology combined, their own born strength, waiting to be claimed. Their extraordinary abilities could only be awakened in the presence of the right star, and Terra's massive yellow sun was the long-awaited key. "So that's it." General Zod's voice reverberated through the empty hangar, a mixture of relief and wonder softening his tone. He had spent countless hours puzzling over what Ethan saw in the Kryptonians. Once a proud and powerful civilization, Krypton lay, in ashes now, its survivors scattered among alien worlds and living at the mercy of strangers. Their vanished glory seemed destined to be forgotten until Ethan arrived and rekindled their hope. Zod recalled their very first meeting, when he'd watched this enigmatic outsider from the shadows, suspicion sharpening every sense. Ethan's unexpected interest in the exiles had unsettled him. Was this man truly here to help, or did he harbor some hidden agenda? Yet with each passing day, Zod discovered how wrong he'd been. Ethan treated the Kryptonians not as tools but as family, providing vital resources and technical expertise, mapping out a path forward, and restoring to them the belief that they could once again stand proud under Terra's sun. General Zod's eyes narrowed as he watched the group of Kryptonians before him. For the first time, he believed that Ethan genuinely intended to help them. He now understood why Ethan prized their race above all others: the innate ability to absorb stellar energy directly and convert it into incredible power. In the vastness of the universe, few talents were as formidable. The assembled Kryptonians exchanged stunned, excited looks. They had always assumed their strength came from the suits of armor they wore, external tools designed to amplify their natural abilities. Yet now, it appeared those armors had merely been a crutch. Fiora, speaking for the group, was the first to voice the question on everyone's mind. Why have we never sensed this energy in battle before? Her tone wavered between confusion and awe. Ethan offered a patient smile. Your armor does much more than boost your defense and strength, he explained. It also blocks the flow of cosmic energy into your bodies. Think of it like a filter. While you gain protection, you lose direct contact with the stellar forces you were born to harness. Murmurs rippled through the Kryptonian ranks. Zod studied Ethan, his suspicion giving way to cautious hope. If Ethan's words were true, then their people had only scratched the surface of their own potential, and with his guidance, they might finally learn to wield the true power of their heritage. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. Only when you strip away your armor and stand bare beneath the sun can you truly connect with the universe's energy. At his words, Fiora and the other Kryptonians exchanged astonished glances. They had grown so accustomed to relying on their suits, so dependent on external defenses, that they'd overlooked the reservoir of power lying dormant within their own bodies. Now, as the thought sank in, each of them felt a spark of recognition. True strength does not come from steel and circuitry, but from the heart and heritage of their race. Ethan continued, the star that bathes this world in light is incredibly potent. A single minute spent under its rays here grants more solar radiation than Clark ever absorbs on Earth in an entire year. Right now, your potential far exceeds his. A surge of exhilaration rippled through the gathered Kryptonians. If they could harness this energy correctly, if they embraced their own innate abilities, they might indeed restore Krypton's lost glory. A question flickered in Fiora's mind. Did this mean they risked the same fate as All-Star Superman, who perished from solar overcharge? Ethan answered before anyone could voice it. Think of yourself as a power bank and the sun as the charger. You draw energy freely until your cells need a rest, but you won't overcharge and burn out. The excess simply fades away. There's no death sentence attached, only untapped potential waiting to be unleashed. With that reassurance, the Kryptonians stood taller, stepping into the sunlight and feeling, for the first time, the raw power of a yellow star coursing through them. It's just like a smartphone. Once its battery reaches full charge, the built-in protection circuitry kicks in and stops any further charging. Chapter 683, Kryptonians versus Universe Emperor. Frieza Kryptonians are born with an extraordinary defense, an innate bioforce field that acts like a second skin. Whenever they draw near a star, this living shield automatically activates, screening out any harmful or excess radiation and allowing only pure solar energy to pass through. It's a vital safeguard, protecting them from the deadly surge of power that would otherwise overwhelm their bodies. Yet even this remarkable mechanism has its limits. In the case of All-Star Superman, he faced a uniquely dangerous opponent, Ethan, a cunning and formidable strategist who had studied Kryptonian weaknesses in grim detail. Anticipating Superman's dependence on his biofield, Ethan tricked him into deactivating the shield. Stripped of its protection, Superman was suddenly exposed to the unfiltered fury of the sun's rays, in exactly the way Ethan had planned. Under an energy surge that immense, his body would simply collapse. No one could survive it. But that's an extreme case. Under normal circumstances, a Kryptonian never faces such a threat. Wrapped in a native bioforce field, they shrug off powerful energy shocks as if they were nothing. Their cells absorb and convert energy with an efficiency no other race can match. Even more remarkable, Kryptonians continue to evolve silently, growth fueled by the boundless energy this planet, Earth, provides. Here, the sun is a bottomless reservoir of pure power, and every daylight hour accelerates their cellular changes. Clark Kent's strength crept upward slowly, garnered from years of intermittent sun exposure. Kryptonians on Earth, by contrast, live bathed in constant solar radiance. Their evolution races ahead, far outpacing his steady but gradual progress. Ethan stood on the edge of the Kryptonian base, watching his people as they moved purposefully across the compound, each step, each task, a testament to their rapid ascent. Ethan's mind buzzed with a daring, unprecedented plan. He would pull the Kryptonians into Frieza's universe and force them into a life-or-death clash with the Cosmic Emperor himself. Over and over, the idea spiraled through his thoughts like a relentless echo. He pictured the coming battle in vivid detail. Would it erupt into a raging inferno that lit the heavens aflame, or devolve into a titanic struggle of wills and strategy? With his supercomputer-like intellect, Ethan could simulate every variable, Frieza's cunning, the Kryptonians' hidden reserves of power, and map out hundreds of millions of possible outcomes in real time. Each scenario played out like its own separate universe behind his eyes. Still, Ethan reminded himself, these were only mental rehearsals. The real confrontation had yet to begin. He craved the raw, unfiltered thrill of the actual fight, blood pounding, fate hanging in the balance, not the hollow excitement of an internal film. True challenge lay in the unpredictable chaos of reality, and Ethan was determined to see it unfold. Ethan watched from the command deck as General Zod and his loyal Kryptonians busied themselves with final preparations. They had no idea they'd crossed into another universe. He'd made sure of that. To them, it still looked like a routine jump to a distant sector of the Milky Way. They lacked the telescopes or navigational sensors to verify otherwise. They depended entirely on Ethan's scouting missions to locate habitable worlds. It was the perfect cover for deploying them against the Cosmic Emperor Frieza. Still, Ethan knew he couldn't leave anything to chance. He had to ensure the Kryptonians remained convinced they were still in their own galaxy, that they could quickly adapt to Frieza's harsh environment, and that they would be ready to unleash their full might the moment battle was joined. General Zod. Zod turned at the sound of his name, snapping crisply to attention. Supervisor, he greeted, voice respectful and taut with anticipation. Be prepared, Ethan said calmly. You'll be going to war soon. Ethan waited until the Kryptonians had time to mow. Billies, he couldn't risk throwing them into combat unprepared. General Zod, summoned to the War Council at once, looked up in surprise. He had expected the call to battle eventually, but not so suddenly. Still, as the leader of his people, he understood the weight of his responsibility. He bowed his head and spoke in a deep, measured tone. We are at your service, Ethan. Whenever you give the order, we will obey. Ethan met Zod's gaze. Our enemy claims to be the Emperor of the Universe, he said quietly. He seeks nothing less than our total annihilation. A hush fell over the assembly. Even with their true power awakened, the Kryptonians would face overwhelming odds. Zod's jaw tightened. How powerful is he? He asked. Ethan allowed a moment's pause. More powerful than any foe you've ever confronted, he replied. This will be a war of extinction. You may be vastly outnumbered, but your strength, your very existence, could still turn the tide. Zod frowned, weighing the challenge in Ethan's words. Very powerful indeed. And yet, for the sake of the galaxy, he would lead his warriors into the breach. Ethan stood on the observation deck of the warship, his cape fluttering in the low gravity. Before him, the assembled Kryptonian commanders, led by General Zod, awaited his orders. Are you all aware of the gravity of our next mission? Ethan's voice was calm, but carried across the silent chamber. Our target is none other than the Cosmic Emperor Frieza. A low rumble ran through the assembled ranks. General Zod stepped forward, his voice resonant. How powerful is he, Master Ethan? Ethan paused, as if weighing his words. To me, he held up a single hand, palm facing outward. Erasing him would take only a thought, but do not let that lull you into overconfidence. His true strength dwarfs anything you faced before. Underestimate him, and you risk the annihilation of our entire race. A hush fell over the deck. General Zod's expression hardened, but his eyes betrayed the weight of Ethan's warning. He bowed his head in respect. I understand, Lord Supervisor. We will marshal every asset, every soldier, ship, and fleet to ensure we meet this challenge fully prepared. Ethan nodded. Very well. Let us show Frieza and the universe the true might of a united Krypton. With that, he turned and strode toward the command bridge, leaving the generals to finalize their battle plans. Chapter 684. The Prototype of the Justice League. General Zod stood atop the dais in the vast Kryptonian Parliament Hall. His eyes blazed like twin suns as they swept over every assembled tribesman. When he spoke, his voice carried the undeniable weight of command through the vaulted chamber. "Fellow countrymen," he began, firm and resolute, "we face an unprecedented threat. While we cannot yet predict the war's exact starting point, we must assume combat readiness at once." A hush fell over the hall. Every Kryptonian present fixed their gaze on him, hanging on his words. Zod continued, his tone growing even more commanding. "This mission does not lie within our own star system, but stretches across the distant reaches of the Milky Way. Yet we cannot and will not hold back. We are Kryptonians, born warriors, unyielding and fearless." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Many faces shone with excitement, eager to prove their valor under General Zod's rallying cry. Seeing their resolve, Zod's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I understand your concerns," he admitted, scanning the assembly with a leader's compassion. "But trust in our strength and our wisdom. Together, there is no challenge we cannot overcome." A surge of pride and determination swept through the hall. As General Zod returned to a stern, confident posture, every warrior prepared to follow him into the unknown expanses of the galaxy and the forging fires of war. Chapter 7. The Weight of Our Duty. Ethan stood before the assembled Kryptonians in the great council chamber, his cape brushing the polished floor. Around him, hundreds of his kinsmen, warriors, scholars, engineers, waited with taut expressions. No one yet knew the full scope of their new assignment. "The Lord Supervisor has entrusted us with a grave responsibility," Ethan announced, his voice echoing from the vaulted ceiling. "He expects us to serve as the galaxy's custodians, its shield against chaos, its keepers of peace." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. When General Zod stepped forward, his presence silenced them at once. Tall and unyielding, Zod's dark eyes gleamed with conviction. "This mission will test every ounce of our strength and every spark of our will," Zod declared. "We are not merely soldiers, we are the cleaning force of the stars. We will sweep away threats, uphold justice, and ensure stability from system to system." A hush fell, then pride swelled in every heart. To bear such a burden was an incomparable honor. Zod raised his hand, and cheers thundered like interstellar storms. "In unity lies our power," he continued. "Stand together as one, and no obstacle can halt our advance, for the glory of Krypton." In the days that followed, Zod oversaw grueling training regimens. Under his watchful gaze, Kryptonians pushed past old limits, honing combat techniques, refining strategy, and unlocking latent abilities that had lain dormant since their exodus. Some learned to manipulate solar energy more precisely. Others mastered telepathic linkages, forging instantaneous lines of communication across light years. The question on many lips was simple: where would they be deployed? Ethan offered a wry smile. "The Milky Way," he said, "where I serve as supervisor. It's only fitting that we begin there." And so, with hearts steeled and purpose clear, the Kryptonian fleet prepared to venture into our galaxy, ready to become its unseen guardians. Ethan watched as General Zod's piercing gaze swept over the assembled Kryptonians. None of them realized that this Milky Way, this version of the galaxy they now inhabited, was subtly unlike any they had known before. The supposed tests they'd endured were nothing more than a pretext, a flimsy justification crafted to win their cooperation. The real work would fall to Zod himself, and he had already begun to lay the groundwork. Since awakening his superbrain, Zod's intellect had sharpened beyond measure. The moment Ethan explained the mission, Zod's augmented mind sprang into action, parsing every implication in a fraction of a second. Cleaner, he mused aloud. So that was the role awaiting them, to purge the galaxy of any invaders threatening the Milky Way. It was a fitting assignment for Kryptonians bred for war. Zod's elite troops, each one a warrior by gene and training, were tailor-made for this sort of frontier combat. Satisfied, Zod nodded to his officers. As they prepared to return to Earth, Ethan felt a chill of anticipation. Back on the blue planet, humanity stood at an unprecedented turning point. The pronouncement of the Milky Way supervisor had struck like a hammer blow, shattering the familiar borders of space. Overnight, the farthest star systems, once the stuff of distant myth, had swung wide open, brimming with untold dangers and incredible opportunities. And now, with Zod's cleaners mobilizing at the galaxy's edge, the future of both Krypton's finest and humankind itself would hinge on how they faced the unknown. America stands unrivaled as the planet's foremost superpower, yet its heavy-handed actions have drawn global condemnation. No nation dares confront it head-on, however, because America's military strength remains unmatched. In truth, Earth's greatest vulnerability is its disunity. Every country, every faction, protects its own interests, making a cohesive foreign policy all but impossible. When the Galactic Overseer delivered its warning, humanity found itself at a complete loss. If an alien civilization ever shows up at our doorstep, will we finally set aside our differences and fight together? Or will we fall apart before the invaders even land? Worse still, might we destroy ourselves first? Ethan didn't concern himself with America's fate. He was struggling under a far greater weight. The Justice League's plan was now in motion, and heroes like Clark Kent and Wonder Woman had already joined the effort. But they faced more than the old evils lurking on Earth. They now had to prepare for unknown threats from the cosmos. Even the combined power of the world's greatest champions would be woefully insufficient to thwart a full-scale alien invasion. With that grim realization, Ethan shifted his focus outward, from Earth to the stars themselves. Ethan sat at the head of the boardroom table as the last of Wayne Group's executives filed out. With a decisive nod, he announced the creation of a new space division, backed by unprecedented funding and resources, to spearhead interstellar exploration and advanced technology research. His goal was simple but bold: secure fresh living space for humanity beyond Earth's orbit. But as Ethan pressed for progress in the stars, a darker threat loomed. He'd come to realize that no amount of rockets or R&D could by itself protect the planet from an alien invasion. What he needed was a powerful ally, someone as mysterious and formidable as the danger they faced. The only person on Earth he could think of was the figure known only as Death. Ethan tapped the side of his cowl, activating the bat signal projector on the roof of Wayne Tower. He intended to summon Death for the urgent negotiations he'd been planning. Yet when the light hit the night sky, there was no answer below. Death had vanished over a month ago. For weeks, Ethan had chased rumors through every channel he had: informants in Gotham's underworld, federal Black Ops files, even clandestine magic circles. All had come up empty. Catwoman and the so-called Ninja, two of the few who'd ever crossed paths with Death, shook their heads when Ethan pressed them. They hadn't seen any trace of him either. Time was slipping away, and Gotham's balance was tipping back toward chaos. Determined not to let the city fall while he searched for Death, Ethan donned his cape once more and resumed his nightly patrol. Almost immediately, it became clear that criminals who'd lain dormant during Death's absence were stirring again, emboldened by the prolonged silence of the one ally he trusted most. As sirens wailed and shadows stretched across the rooftops, Ethan knew the fight was only beginning, and that finding Death might be the only way to turn the tide. That night, after wrapping up another crime-fighting operation, Batman drove the Batmobile through the quiet city streets. His headlights swept across an all-too-familiar silhouette, a flowing black cape and sleek gold and black armor glinting ominously in the moonlight. "Grim Reaper," Batman muttered, slamming on the brakes. Within seconds, he was out of the car, boots echoing on the asphalt as he closed the distance. "You finally showed up," he said, keeping his voice low but urgent. A deep, resonant tone answered him from beneath the Reaper's cowl. "I knew you'd be looking for me." Batman didn't hesitate. "I need your help. We're up against something unprecedented, threats we can't handle on our own. If we don't join forces, innocent people will pay the price." The Grim Reaper was still for a long moment. Then he gave a single, deliberate nod. "I understand our predicament. Typically, I work alone, but when the darkness grows this deep, I'll stand with you." With that, he turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Batman alone under the pale glow of street lamps, and a fragile new alliance hanging in the balance. Chapter 685, Talia's Purpose. Ethan shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. Joining the Justice League would give Batman access to every detail of my operations. I could fabricate false leads, but that's tedious, and frankly, I'm not in the mood. Besides, I'd rather keep Death's true identity a secret. Batman's cape rustled as he shifted, his face shadowed beneath the cowl. He knew better than anyone that when Death gave his word, he kept it, and Ethan's promise was ironclad. He understood the Vigilante's capabilities and just how vital he was to Gotham's survival. Yet as a member of the League, Batman lived by a different creed, pooling intelligence so heroes could act in concert when danger loomed. He also recognized, however, that Death was a lone wolf, driven by his own convictions. "Thank you, Death," Batman said quietly, respect lacing his tone. Ethan inclined his head. "You're welcome." With that, he stepped back into the gathering darkness, leaving Batman alone under the faint glow of the bat signal. Ethan's silhouette dissolved into the night, until there was nothing left but a flicker of movement in the shadows. Batman lingered on the rooftop, eyes narrowing as he watched the spot where Ethan had stood. In the silent aftermath, questions surfaced. Where had Ethan gone during the past month? What secret missions or personal matters had pulled him away? Even heroes need time off, but an entire month was unusual. Across Gotham, darkness draped the streets like a heavy veil. Streetlights sputtered, casting restless patterns of light and shadow. In a neglected corner of the city stood an old warehouse, now the hidden refuge of Catwoman, Selina Kyle, and the League of Assassins' own Talia al Ghul. Selina sat perched on a dusty crate, dressed in her signature black catsuit and wearing her sleek cat mask. She toyed with a small silver dagger, turning it over in her gloved fingers. Every few moments she glanced toward the high window, her eyes glittering with a mix of impatience and anxiety. The knife's surface caught the dim light, and her breath came in quiet, measured bursts. In another shadowed corner, Talia al Ghul knelt on the cold concrete floor, her back perfectly straight. She had closed her eyes to rest, but the subtle tension in her jaw betrayed a readiness to spring into action at any moment. Her features were composed and stern, yet behind closed lids, a faint spark of anticipation flickered. Outside, Gotham's restless pulse continued. Inside, two of its most formidable women waited, each for her own reasons, each mindful of secrets yet to unfold. Selina's hand tightened around the hilt of a finely crafted dagger, its steel edge catching the weak warehouse light and winking with cold purpose. A soft shuffle of footsteps snapped through the hush, and both women looked up. From the shadows emerged a tall figure draped in a black cloak, his armor trimmed in dark gold, a smooth mask concealing his face. "Ethan, where have you been?" Selina's voice trembled with relief and lingering fear. "We were starting to think something terrible had happened to you." She'd been on edge ever since Ethan vanished. In his absence, Gotham's underworld had sensed a power vacuum. Criminals grew reckless, convinced that without Ethan's silent threat looming over them, there were no limits to their violence. Even Talia, ever calculating, had fretted that her own schemes might unravel if he didn't return. Ethan lifted a gloved hand in a casual shrug. "I had some personal matters to attend to." Talia crossed her arms, her lips curling in a faint, impatient smile. "Personal matters? Do you really think you're owed a vacation?" Ethan's voice was low, almost amused. "A man can't work himself to the bone without taking a moment to breathe." Selina exchanged a glance with Talia, relief warring with irritation. In that instant, the unspoken understanding passed between them. No matter the cost, Ethan was back, and Gotham would hold its breath once more. "Of course not," Selina exclaimed, her voice quick and tense. "We were. He just worried about your safety." Relief and concern warred in her tone. She was overjoyed to see Ethan again, but still afraid of what might have happened to him. Talia, who had been watching in silence, finally opened her eyes. Her gaze held Ethan's for a heartbeat before she said softly, "You're back." Her voice remained calm, almost detached, but there was an unmistakable light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Yeah," Ethan replied with a small nod, lifting a hand in greeting. "Now, let's see what you two have been working on." In an instant, Selina and Talia exchanged a quick glance and sprang into motion. Selina moved like a panther, supple, swift, each step so silent it might as well have been a whisper. She arched her fingers, her nails extended into razor-sharp claws that traced silver streaks through the air as she aimed fierce, slashing strikes at Ethan. Ethan didn't bother raising a sturdy block or bracing for impact. He knew his defenses could shrug off any blow they mustered. What he wanted was to gauge Selena's speed and precision. With a sudden burst of motion, he slipped through her attack, the world blurring for a heartbeat, and reappeared directly behind her, before Selena even registered his movement. "The speed is promising," Ethan said softly, "but your technique still needs work." He reached out and gripped Selena's arm. Startled, she tried to wrench free, only to find her limb locked in Ethan's unyielding hold. At that instant, Talia struck. In a flash, she appeared behind him, the blade of her dagger catching the light as she drove it toward Ethan's vest. Over the past month, the three of them had drilled relentlessly, honing their coordination under pressure, and today, they were drilling for real. The city's most ruthless gangsters were armed to the teeth, and one mistake could be fatal. Yet Ethan seemed to sense Talia's move before it happened. He pivoted smoothly, letting the dagger slice through empty air. "Nice teamwork," he complimented her, nodding. Without breaking rhythm, he stepped forward, closed the distance to Talia, and seized the dagger by its hilt. With a firm tug, he wrenched it free of her grip. "You need to build more upper body strength," he advised, slipping the dagger back into her hand. Talia took it, her lips curving in a hint of reluctance and respect. Selena blinked, yearning to test her own mettle, and eager for Ethan's next lesson. Talia knew there was still a wide gulf between her own abilities and Ethan's, but rather than discouraging her, it only steeled her resolve. They'd been sparring for 30 straight minutes, and both women were drenched in sweat. Even the toughest trainees couldn't sustain that kind of pace for so long. Yet Ethan stood there, perfectly composed, and not a single bead of moisture on his brow. Silently, Talia set about her preparations. First, she uncapped the small vial of aromatherapeutic anesthetic she'd been refining for weeks. Then, with trembling hands, she poured Ethan a generous glass of wine. He'd made no secret of his fondness for cocktails, so the gesture felt natural rather than suspicious. After all, there was a modest bar tucked away in their base, a fact that made offering him a drink seem perfectly ordinary. As Talia offered him the glass, her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and guilt. If her plan succeeded, she would finally bridge the gap between them, though she still had no idea what would come next. Chapter 686. The two who succeeded knew they were in the wrong. Talia glided across the room, her trademark radiant smile lighting every step. In her hand, a gleaming silver tray held 2 artisan cocktails that caught the soft glow of the lanterns overhead. One was a masterpiece she'd perfected after countless experiments, her personal gift for Ethan. She'd begun with the strongest spirits she could procure, blending them with rare fruit juices and sweet syrups. Hours of meticulous stirring and filtering had yielded a drink of vivid color and singular complexity. Yet beneath its alluring facade lay a secret known only to her. With a melodious voice that carried an undercurrent of invitation, Talia leaned forward. "Death, please, taste the wine I made just for you." Ethan, who'd been seated quietly in the corner, looked up at her. His dark eyes lingered on her face, noting the nervous anticipation shining there, and catching the faint, intoxicating fragrance drifting from her. He reached out, lifted the glass, and brought it to his lips. A hush fell over the room as he took that first gentle sip. Ethan let the wine coat his tongue, sweet but never cloying, with just enough warmth from the alcohol to set his pulse alight. He relaxed, relieved that this wasn't some cheap sedative masked by a splash of wine. He prided himself on refusing shoddy tricks, yet he had no idea Talia had already outsmarted him. Hidden in the glass was her latest creation, a carefully balanced blend of powerful animal tranquilizer and an experimental aphrodisiac. Separately, each compound was potent. Together, they produced a crushing wave of drowsiness, laced with disorienting desire. For ordinary people, the mixture alone would plunge them into a deep sleep. For superhumans like Ethan, whose accelerated metabolism usually shrugged off standard doses, Talia had cranked the concentration far higher. Every calculation had been hers, every milligram measured, to make sure Ethan would collapse without resistance. As he raised the glass to his lips, he remained blissfully unaware of the storm about to overtake him. Talia's fingers trembled ever so slightly as she watched Ethan lift the wineglass to his lips. She'd slipped the special compound into his drink, an odorless, tasteless sedative, powerful enough to render even a trained fighter unconscious. Nearby, Catwoman lay sprawled across a cushioned settee, deep in slumber, her sleek costume creased beneath her. If this plan failed, everything would collapse. "Why did Selina fall asleep so suddenly?" Ethan asked, glancing toward the corner of the bar where Catwoman's whiskered cowl lay abandoned on a low table. Talia forced calm into her voice. "She's just exhausted. Long night, it happens." She kept her gaze polite and steady, praying he wouldn't notice the faint tremor in her hand. Ethan nodded and raised the glass to his mouth again. He drew out the remaining wine thoughtfully, swirling it around his tongue as though savoring a rare vintage. Relief washed over Talia when he set the empty glass down without hesitation. So far, so good. With Ethan distracted, Talia stepped away from their table and moved toward the bar. She retrieved a clean glass, glancing back to be sure he wasn't watching. Hidden in her palm were 2 small tablets, an antidote she'd specially formulated to block the effects of the very incense she'd used on Catwoman. Talia slipped them up her nostrils and inhaled sharply, the bitter powder stinging the back of her throat. Within seconds, she felt a cool clarity settle over her mind. Back at the table, she poured another generous measure of wine, careful to stir the sedative in thoroughly. Ethan's dark eyes followed her every move, but he said nothing. Catwoman remained motionless, the drug's potency unchallenged, yet. Talia added the second glass toward Ethan with a practiced smile. "Another?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. "You seem to enjoy the last one." Ethan's lips curved in a wry grin. "Why not?" He lifted the glass. Talia exhaled silently, bracing herself for what? Tea came next. With the antidote coursing through her system, she was ready for whatever twists the night might bring. Talia slipped back into the room and immediately noticed Ethan's eyes growing heavy. The sedative was doing its work. She smiled and lifted her glass. One more death. Without hesitation, Ethan accepted the wine. The crimson liquid glinted in the low light as he swallowed. His movements slowed, his gaze clouded over, and within moments he slumped onto the sofa, fully surrendered to sleep. A quiet thrill ran through Talia. She pressed a gentle hand to his cheek, confirming his unconsciousness. "It's done," she breathed. She refused to stop the aromatherapy. Even a faint trace of that mist was enough to keep his metabolism from shaking off the drug. Leaning closer, she reached up and carefully removed his death mask. To her relief, his true face was neither gruesome nor off-putting, merely the calm, handsome features of a man she found impossible to resist. Talia's heart pounded. "You're mine, Death." Before she could think twice, she bent and kissed him. The man behind the legendary persona, strong, magnetic, forever out of reach, lay vulnerable beneath her lips, and Talia felt a rush of triumph and longing all at once. Talia's pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to remain calm. She still had work to do. Kneeled beside the low wall, she upended the worn leather sack and began fishing out silver coins and trinkets, one by one. With each piece, she performed her time-honored test, rubbing and even briefly tasting the metal to separate the genuine articles from clever fakes. The midday sun beat down on Chimelong Happy Valley, and by the time she'd filled her bag with every authentic item, even the park's ornamental fountains had run dry. Exhausted and parched, Talia finally lowered her head for a moment of rest. That's when a sharp crack landed at the base of her skull. Stars exploded behind her eyelids, and she slumped forward, out cold. When she came to, her tongue tasted of sweat and metallic tang. Blinking up at a masked silhouette, she tried to speak, but only managed a groan. "You, asshole." "Despicable," purred Catwoman Selina, kneeling beside her. Selina's tone was disappointed, almost personal. "Even for you, that was low." Over the years, Selina had prided herself on her place at the Grim Reaper's side. In her mind, she held his favor above all else. Yet he'd never seen her as anything more than a pampered pet, petted, admired, and ultimately dispensable. Now that Talia had outwitted them both with her dirty little trick, Selina's devotion felt hollow. With a quiet curse, Selina rose to her full height and stepped away. Her gaze drifted to Ethan, who leaned against a nearby pillar, arms folded, his expression unreadable under the street lamp's glow. "So our guest has a bag full of silver," Selina observed coolly. "Quite the haul, tested with her mouth of all things. Ingenious method, revolting." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. I prefer results over courtesy. Selena's eyebrows rose. Right, as long as it works. She cast one last glance at Talia, still crumpled on the pavement where she'd fallen unconscious. But don't expect me to admire the technique. Turning on her heel, Selena melted into the shadows, leaving Talia to darkness, and leaving Ethan to consider the evidence she'd acquired by such unsavory means. Chapter 7. Awakening. Mr. Death, Selena murmured, pressing herself against him like a barnacle clinging to a ship's hull. Ethan shifted beneath her, waiting patiently. At last he cleared his throat, and Selena reluctantly rolled off. A moment later, Talia stirred at his side. Though the League of Assassins had trained her to resist stun gas, Catwoman's formidable strength had nearly broken her neck, hence her prolonged unconsciousness. Ethan sat up on the edge of the mattress and glanced between them. He tugged the sheet tighter around himself. It was the only stitch of modesty he had. Can someone explain exactly what happened? He spoke with quiet authority. Ty, completely at ease despite being the only one naked. In contrast, Selena and Talia exchanged uneasy looks, neither willing to meet his gaze. They knew they'd crossed a line. Selena swallowed. I'll take responsibility, she said at last, lifting her chin. Before she could elaborate, Ethan reached out and tapped her lightly on the forehead. Ouch! Selena clapped a hand to her head. What was that for? Ethan offered a small apologetic smile. Sometimes you need a little reminder not to get carried away. Talia stood, stretching out her aching limbs. We owe you an explanation and an apology. Ethan folded his arms. I'm listening. Selena and Talia exchanged resigned glances. Together, they began to recount the night's chaos. The break-in at the Gotham Financial Tower, the flashbang that went off in the lobby, and the frantic rooftop escape that had ended in all three of them unconscious in this dingy safe house. As they spoke, Ethan's stern expression softened. He wasn't just the stoic reaper they'd feared, he was the one person who'd saved them, and now he deserved the truth. When Selena finished, Talia added quietly, We should never have underestimated you, and we're sorry. Ethan nodded once. Apology accepted. But next time, let's try a little less acrobatics, okay? Selena couldn't help a wry smile. Agreed, but you have to admit, it was a memorable entrance. Ethan chuckled, pulling the sheet higher. That it was. For the first time that morning, the tension lifted from the room. In their own way, each of them recognized it. They made a formidable team, when they weren't trying to kill one another, at least. Chapter 687. Parallax Monster. Ethan's voice cut through the tense air. Do you really think that just saying you'll take responsibility makes it all right? Selena fell silent, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Ethan fixed his gaze on her. Put yourself in my shoes, he said. If a complete stranger had done this to you, would you forgive him and stay just because he promised to make it right? Selena rubbed the sore spot on her neck, still smarting from where he'd grabbed her. She had no answer. Ethan had every right to call them out. They'd clearly overstepped his boundaries. Thalia's face went pale. Originally, her only goal had been to bear Ethan's powerful offspring, but now she realized she wanted more than just a child. She wanted the father, too. Her voice shook as she stepped forward. Ethan, I know this is my fault. I love you so much. He didn't soften. Instead, his tone turned almost cruelly calm. Let me ask you this, he said. If another man had forced himself on you and then just said, I'll take responsibility, would you forgive him and stay? Thalia's breath caught in her throat. The very idea was unbearable. Yet panic flared in her chest as she struggled to craft an answer. Thalia's decision to carry Ethan's child guaranteed one thing. He'd have to stay by her side. Even the god of death himself couldn't abide that arrangement. His outrage was all but inevitable. Sensing the storm to come, Thalia gently steered Selena aside as they left Ethan brooding alone. Let him cool off, she murmured. Pushing him now will only make things worse. Selena opened her mouth to argue, but Thalia gave her a warning look. It wasn't worth provoking Ethan any further. He watched them go, arms crossed, voice low and tense. What about Damien? He asked once they were out of earshot. He's gone, right? Selena hesitated. She'd never planned to let Thalia truly bear Ethan's heir. If a child was truly in his heart, he could have chosen Chelan or one of the others. This had all been a calculated play. Now, with Thalia so deeply in love, her own schemes had shifted, and Damien's future had been erased. Unless Batman and Harley Quinn or Poison Ivy ended up mothering that lineage instead, the little boy would simply never exist. And in the ever-mutable DC universe, nothing was certain. Selina sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know, she admitted at last. Catwoman's still inexperienced. She hasn't had time to learn the moves she once did. She glanced at Thalia's retreating figure. We'll need a new plan. Ethan stood at the edge of the moonlit courtyard, his dark cloak barely stirring in the night breeze. Thalia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. In moments like these, she always lost all sense of direction. Beside her, Selina shifted uneasily, her eyes darting between Thalia and the silent figure before them. We need to placate death, Thalia whispered, more to herself than to Selina. Or we find a way to be carrying his child. That'll hold him off. Selina's brow shot up. Thalia had once trained her blade on this same woman, once planned to end her life, and yet here they were, allies by necessity. Is that really our only option? Selina asked, voice tight with disbelief. Thalia met her gaze. If we bear his child, he can't strike us down. A father, any man, won't want to hurt his own offspring. Selina surveyed Ethan's motionless form. He hadn't spoken a word since they arrived, and he certainly hadn't invited further conversation. She let out a half-laugh. You really think he'll go along with this? We're beautiful, sure, but he's death itself. What if he doesn't care? Thalia forced a reassuring smile. He's still human enough to protect his name. Besides, she added, leaning closer, we're irresistible. Selina frowned but said nothing more. Desperation had a way of making even the most skeptical swallow their doubts. Over the next week, they tried everything. Day after day, they returned to the courtyard, called Ethan by name, pleaded with him, and finally resorted to what they were sure would seal the bargain. Yet when Thalia pressed the small, blood-stained test strip into Selina's shaking hand, the result was clear, negative, and Thalia's own test, taken at dawn, told the same story. They had given themselves over to hope so completely that denial almost blinded them. How could there be no sign of life after all they'd done? Selina stared at her reflection in the glass vial, disbelief etched into every line of her face. Thalia's stomach twisted with dread until a single thought struck her like lightning. He can claim souls, but he can't create them, she whispered. Death may wield the power to end life, but he has no power to give it. Selina's eyes widened as realization sank in. So all our efforts were pointless. Exactly, Thalia said, voice low and determined. We can't bargain with someone who cannot bargain back. Under the pale glow of the moon, the two women stood in the silence of their shattered plan. With death itself unable to grant them what they so desperately needed, they faced a harsher truth. There would be no bargain, no safety in motherhood, and no escaping the darkness Ethan carried with him. Thalia stared out over Gotham's rooftops, her mind spinning. Could it be that transhumans simply can't conceive? Or had some reproductive barrier already emerged between her kind and ordinary humans? The more she thought about it, the more her head ached. If she wasn't pregnant, how could she ever hope to build a life, let alone a family, with someone as taciturn, as cold as death? Across town, Ethan hadn't been idle. When Thalia and Selina had attempted to soothe him, he'd slipped away from Gotham without a word. Meanwhile, in the coastal metropolis of Seaside City, where neon-lit boardwalks met the relentless crash of night waves and the latest breakthroughs in technology seemed to arrive daily, another young man was charting his own course. Hal Jordan, clad in the emerald uniform of the Green Lantern Corps, stood alone on a wind-swept pier. The power ring on his finger glowed with vibrant green energy, casting rippling reflections across the water's surface. As an intern still learning the full extent of his abilities, Hal treasured a singular dream to safeguard the universe, to one day stand among the legendary Green Lanterns whose exploits he'd admired since childhood. But destiny, as it often does, had other plans. A ripple of yellow light split the sky, a harbinger of the Parallax monster. Even in the Corps' earliest training modules, cadets had been warned about Parallax, a primordial entity of fear capable of driving the strongest wills to ruin. Now, face to face with that ancient dread, Hal Jordan braced himself for a confrontation unlike any he'd ever imagined. Ethan stood alone on the rocky outcrop, the wind tearing at his Green Lantern uniform. Before him loomed the Parallax, an eldritch horror born from the depths of primal terror. Its form was ever-shifting, a black obsidian mass veined with pulsing yellow light, as though the very flames of fear burned within. Every undulation of its body seemed to whisper nightmares, promising agony to any who dared approach. Since time immemorial, no enemy had fed so ravenously on fear. With every quiver of panic in its victims' hearts, the parallax grew stronger, twisting their innermost dread into violent rage, then consuming that energy to fuel its own unholy power. Entire star systems had fallen under its influence, civilizations collapsing into chaos as hope drained away. Ethan's chest tightened. He was only a rookie, fresh out of the Corps' training village, and yet here he was, facing what amounted to a cosmic-level threat. His ring's emerald glow trembled with uncertainty. If he failed, if he let the parallax feed unchecked, untold worlds would be swallowed by darkness. He drew a deep breath. Fear was precisely the parallax's weapon, and he refused to give it that victory. "In for a penny, in for a pound," he muttered. Raising his right hand, he whispered the ancient oath. "In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light." A beam of pure green energy shot forth, illuminating the jagged cliffs around him. The parallax recoiled, its yellow tendrils flickering in surprise. For a moment, Ethan felt hope. He knew, however, that he couldn't hold the creature off alone. With a mental command, he opened a channel to Oa, the Green Lantern Corps' fortress world. Across the vastness of space, the Citadel's towers glowed with emerald brilliance. "Oa Command, this is Lantern Jordan on Sector 2814. I've engaged the parallax, requesting immediate backup." The response crackled almost instantly. "Understood, Lantern Jordan. Reinforcements en route. Hold your position." Ethan nodded to himself. He had a mission, to protect the universe, to shield the innocent from horrors like the parallax. Rookie or not, he would stand his ground. The incoming rings of other lanterns would bolster him soon enough, but until then, every second counted. As he soared forward, green constructs forming into shields and blades, the parallax hissed and surged, ready to plunge the galaxy into its abyssal nightmare. Yet in Ethan's heart burned the steadfast courage of the Corps. No matter how terrifying the foe, the light of willpower would always shine brightest in the darkest hour. When Hal Jordan's plea for reinforcements reached Sinestro, the veteran commander of the Green Lantern Corps, Sinestro refused. He had faced the parallax monster before and understood all too well the creature's nature. Born from pure terror, it feeds on fear, and no conventional weapon can truly destroy it. Pressed for advice, Sinestro urged Hal to abandon the fight and let the parallax monster wander off on its own. Hal could not accept such counsel. He knew that if the beast continued to grow, it would soon bring ruin upon every sector of the universe. He would not stand idly by while his home world and those he loved teetered on the brink of annihilation. Resolute, Hal vowed to confront the parallax monster alone. Ethan's appearance at that critical moment was no accident. It was designed to reinforce his standing as the galaxy supervisor and remind all who witnessed him that even in the darkest hour, true heroes rise. Chapter 688, The Parallax Monster Arrives. The Green Lantern Corps, galactic guardians of renown, find themselves powerless against the parallax monster. All they can do is stand aside as it feeds on entire civilizations, growing ever more formidable, while the Lanterns sacrifice one world after another just to buy themselves time. In contrast, the Galactic Overseer need not resort to such desperate measures. He can confront Parallax directly, and in doing so, he exposes just how far above the Lanterns he truly stands. That, ultimately, is why Ethan has come. He intends to remind every corner of the cosmos of the Overseer's preeminence. Far beyond the reaches of any star chart, a vast shadow drifted silently into Earth's low orbit. It moved like some slumbering behemoth, inexorably closing in on Seaside City, California. This was no mere asteroid or derelict ship, but the cosmic horror the Lanterns had christened the Parallax Monster. It loomed as a floating obsidian mountain, its hull black skin pocked and weathered like an ancient relic eroded by time itself. But what drew the eye most were its twin lantern-like eyes, cold, jaundiced spheres that pulsed with a terrifying energy. They burned like twin stars in the darkness, radiating a pressure so intense it set every sensor on high alert. Now, as Parallax's ominous silhouette darkened the coastline, the stage was set. The Green Lanterns could only watch and wait for Ethan's arrival, knowing full well that the fate of countless worlds would hinge on the showdown to come. The Parallax entity drifted through the cosmic expanse, its countless tentacles unfurling like massive vines probing the void. It moved deliberately, slow, but each motion charged with such raw force that the surrounding stars seemed to shudder in its wake. Its destination was unmistakable: Seaside City, a quiet West Coast town beloved by its residents, and known to few as Hal Jordan's childhood home. From afar, the monster's lantern-bright yellow eyes fixed on the city below, glowing with avarice and cruelty. In those depths, it sensed the vibrant streets, the laughter of children, and the fragile beating hearts of thousands who would soon tremble in terror. Parallax hung poised on the brink of descent, eager to feast on the fear and despair of the innocent, to make their anguish the first offering in its conquest of Earth. But Earth's defenders were ready. Deep in orbit, aboard a hidden military platform, sensors flared to life the moment the creature appeared. In a secure vault, 3 specially designed nuclear warheads stood primed. No ordinary weapons, but arcane devices forged to counter threats beyond any conventional arsenal. As alarms echoed through the base, commanders braced themselves for the unthinkable: to strike first and hope to save Seaside City from the hungry void descending upon it. Ethan watched from the command module's viewport as the 3 nuclear-armed rockets, each precisely engineered for the vacuum of space, locked onto their target. The moment the engines ignited, the warheads leapt forward like arrows released from a taut bow, piercing the void toward the Parallax monster's last known coordinates. Their velocity was astonishing, as if they cleaved through time itself, carrying with them the collective hope and determination of every soul who bore witness. Yet Ethan knew that detonating a nuclear device in the emptiness of space was anything but straightforward. In the vast cosmic ocean, where silence reigned and no air could convey sound or shock waves, the devastating effects we expect on Earth would all but vanish. Without an atmosphere to transmit a blast wave, there could be no crushing shock front, no iconic mushroom cloud. Instead, the bomb's heat energy would radiate outward at light speed, dispersing instantly like a drop of ink dissolving in a boundless sea. Powerful in theory, yet perilously diffuse in practice. Still, humanity refused to yield. As the rockets hurtled onward, Ethan steeled himself for whatever came next. If this desperate gambit was to work, they had to rely on cutting-edge engineering and a measure of faith that even in the cold expanse of space, a spark of human ingenuity might yet ignite victory. Ethan and his team knew that in the vacuum of space, a nuclear bomb wouldn't unleash the massive shockwaves seen on Earth. Still, the searing heat and penetrating radiation, especially gamma rays and X-rays that need no atmosphere, could inflict real damage on the Parallax. As the 3 warheads drifted closer, the alien behemoth loomed into view in all its nightmarish glory, a gargantuan leviathan adrift among the stars, its vast body covered in writhing tentacles and cavernous mouthparts, each yawning like a black hole ready to devour anything nearby. A sickly purple glow pulsed across its flesh, as if some demon had clawed its way up from the underworld. Then, in an instant, the Parallax came alive. Its colossal tentacles twitched and coiled in the emptiness of space like serpents hunting prey, lashing toward the silent warheads. Simultaneously, its grotesque maws unfolded like the petals of a nightmarish flower, exposing a labyrinth of bioluminescent chambers that glowed with an unearthly light. A flood of golden energy burst from the center of the Parallax monster's maw, surging outward like an apocalyptic torrent. In the inky void of deep space, that brilliant beam carved through the darkness, racing straight for the trio of nuclear warheads. Its intensity was so great that it banished every hint of shadow, illuminating the missiles as if they were suspended in a spotlight. They hung motionless for a heartbeat, then detonated. But in the vacuum, the nuke's destructive force was almost anticlimactic. There was no thunderous roar, only a blinding flare of light and a pulse of radiation that blossomed and faded like a fleeting fireworks display. The Parallax monster, however, did not waver. It pressed on, unleashing one golden beam after another, effortlessly blasting aside meteoroids, asteroids, and every other scrap of cosmic debris standing between it and its unknown destination. Ethan stood on the rampart's shattered stones, his heart pounding as the parallax beast tore through the barrier of light. No defense would stop it now. With a thunderous roar, the creature hurled itself through the widening breach and hurtled toward the city below like a blazing meteor. In an instant, its pace doubled. A trailing comet's tail of searing energy followed in its wake, and the beast's form grew until it seemed destined to swallow the entire coastline. Its radiance outshone the noonday sun, painting the waves a molten gold, and every pulse of light threatened to consume the sky. Below him, the citizens of Port Cerulean scattered in terror. Parents clasped children to their chests, merchants abandoned their stalls, and sailors fled from the docks, anywhere to escape the approaching inferno. Their screams rose in a crescendo of panic and despair, echoing off the stone walls like a dirge. But there was no escaping this tide of destruction. The parallax beast's momentum was unstoppable. Fire spurted from its gaping maw, and the air itself shimmered with heat as it closed in on the innocent city. Fear spread through the crowd like wildfire, and Ethan felt their hopelessness wash over him. Clenching his fists, he tried to rally himself. Somewhere inside him, a spark of resolve kindled against the overwhelming dread. The city might be doomed, but he refused to give in. Not yet. As the beast's blazing bulk eclipsed the heavens, Ethan locked eyes with the oncoming horror, steeling himself for whatever would come next. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest, not just at the thought of dying, but at the dread of an inexplicable force tearing their city apart. He had no idea why this monstrous terror had appeared or what drove it to obliterate everything in its path. All he could do was stand frozen, helpless, as fate bore down on them. Then, like a guardian spirit summoned by his prayers, a figure in green materialized atop a nearby skyscraper. Clad in a sleek emerald suit, eyes burning with unshakable resolve, he surveyed the devastation below. It was Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern. From Ethan's vantage point on the rubble-strewn street, the creature looked even more nightmarish. A colossal, writhing mass of tentacles that blotted out the sun, each limb crackling with deadly energy. Buildings crumbled under its onslaught, and terrified citizens scattered in all directions. Hal drew a slow, steady breath, centering his will. Ethan watched as the lantern's chest emblem glowed brighter, veins of green light pulsing through his uniform. Every muscle in Hal's body tensed as he closed his eyes and summoned the full force of his power. In that suspended moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then when Hal opened his eyes again, they blazed with unwavering determination, proof that hope still stood a chance against the darkness. Ethan lifted his Green Lantern ring high, channeling every ounce of his willpower into it. The ring flared with brilliant emerald light, coalescing into a searing energy wave that tore through the air like a great green dragon. It slammed into Parallax's own corrosive beam in mid-sky, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to shatter. A deafening explosion rocked the city, obliterating buildings and sending debris flying in all directions. The force of the blast hurled Ethan backward. He sailed through the air in a cruel arc before crashing into a fractured wall. Pain lanced through him as he landed in the rubble, his suit torn and body bruised. Groaning, he forced himself to his knees, every movement a torment. Yet he refused to stay down. This city, this planet, needed him. Summoning his will, he staggered to his feet, ring still shining with fierce green light. Through churning dust and drifting smoke, Ethan fixed his gaze on Parallax. The monster stood at the city's heart like a living mountain, its massive form bristling with writhing tentacles that crackled with deadly energy. Each lash of those appendages seared the air, and from its cavernous maw came a roar so loud it made the ground tremble. But Ethan remained undaunted. He tightened his grip on the ring and prepared to charge once more, Earth's last hope against the darkness. Ethan's lantern ring, this extraordinary artifact, had been his guiding star through countless battles. Whenever his will was strong enough, he could shape its energy into solid constructs, manipulate physical objects with mere thought, even alter his own form, bolster his spirit, and unlock a host of superhuman abilities. Yet now, facing the Parallax, he had never felt such overwhelming pressure. The soft green glow of the ring pulsed in his palm, the source of all his power, and his only hope. He closed his hand around it, drawing warmth and courage from its light, but the fear buried deep in his gut refused to fade. Parallax's strength was beyond anything he'd ever imagined, a force that had driven the veteran Lanterns of the Green Lantern Corps into retreat, forcing them to seal and evade rather than confront. And here stood Ethan, a newly minted Green Lantern, facing an enemy his training had scarcely prepared him for. Still, the ring answered his resolve. As long as his will held firm, hope remained. Taking a steadying breath, Ethan lifted his free hand and called upon the ring's power, ready to prove that even the most daunting darkness could be met with unwavering light. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had no illusions about defeating the Parallax monster. In truth, he only wanted to keep Earth safe. Drawing in a steadying breath, he willed himself to calm. Fear was natural, after all, but it must not take hold of him now. He had to stand his ground. Closing his eyes, Ethan reached deep into himself and called upon the power of his Green Lantern ring. In his mind's eye, he became a bolt of crackling emerald lightning, streaking toward the Parallax monster at impossible speed. Then he was a hulking, unbreakable mountain, unmoved by whatever cosmic assault his foe unleashed. Next, he conjured himself as a roaring inferno, determined to burn the creature to ashes. But each vision dissolved before it could solidify. No matter how vividly he imagined his victory, some invisible force clipped his wings. A cold desperation crept in, and Ethan's resolve faltered for a moment. He was on the brink of doubt, but he could not surrender. Not when the lives of everyone on Earth depended on him. He clenched his fist, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The ring sensed his renewed determination. It began to glow, brighter and more brilliant than ever before, ready to unleash whatever power Ethan could muster. Ethan drew every ounce of his power into a single searing beam of emerald light. In an instant, it coalesced above him, twisting and coiling through the night sky like a colossal draconic serpent. Far below, the Parallax monster, its millions of glowing eyes fixed on this new threat, bellowed in fury. Black tentacles writhed upward to meet the attack, bristling with crackling energy. When beam met tentacle, the collision ripped through the darkness like twin lightning bolts. A thunderous shockwave exploded outward, setting the heavens alight with flickering brilliance and sending tremors through every street of the city. Skyscrapers groaned and cracked under the pressure, windows shattered, steel frames buckled, and whole facades collapsed into clouds of dust. On the boulevards below, panicked citizens scattered in every direction, their screams swallowed by the relentless roar of destruction. Still, Ethan held his ground. He planted his feet on the shattered pavement and plunged deeper into his reserves, infusing the green light with fresh intensity. The beam surged forward once more, unyielding and blinding. Boom, boom. Each impact drove the monster back, carving arcs of raw power across its armored hide. The entire city shook as if it might be torn apart, but Ethan would not relent. With a fierce cry, he hurled his will against the Parallax monster, determined to end this nightmare once and for all. Ethan faced the Parallax monster's immense form, its twin golden eyes gleaming with contempt. A writhing mass of tentacles coiled around its body, each one twisting provocatively as if daring him to move. Between rows of petal-like jaws, it emitted a harsh, rasping cry that sent shivers down his spine. A human. The creature's voice rumbled, low and infernal, reverberating as though it were speaking from the depths of some dark abyss. A human. It lingered on the word, savoring the concept. Then it bowed its monstrous head, fixing those burning golden eyes on Ethan. A human became a Green Lantern. Impressive. Though the creature praised him, its tone cut sharper than any blade. But I sense fear in your heart. Ethan's grip tightened on his ring. He couldn't deny it. His heart pounded so fiercely, it felt as if it might burst from his chest. Your power, the Parallax monster continued, voice heavy with satisfaction, makes your fear delicious. Ethan forced down a tremor that threatened his resolve. He had trained his mind to remain calm, to stand unwavering in the face of terror, but this being was unlike anything he'd ever confronted. Still, he squared his shoulders. I won't let you feed on my fear, he said, voice steady despite the pounding in his ears. A low, amused growl rumbled from the beast's throat. We shall see, human, it whispered. We shall see. Chapter 690, The Parallax Beast Emerges. Ethan crouched behind a shattered pillar, heart hammering in his chest. A blast of sound ripped through the ruined streets, the Parallax Beast's roar, shaking the ground like a thunderclap. Every window trembled. Dust and debris danced on the air, and an invisible force pressed down on him, weighing his lungs tight. "Mortals," the creature's voice boomed, a guttural growl that dripped with contempt. "Fear is born of your weakness. Embrace your terror, and become my prey." Its words rang in Ethan's ears as the monster stepped forward into the flickering light of the wreckage. A twisted smile crept across its grotesque features, its maw splitting wide. Inside, a tongue of smoldering crimson flicked like a serpent, and rows of blade-sharp fangs gleamed unnaturally in the gloom. Deep within that cavernous throat, golden motes of light coalesced. They shimmered and writhed, like living snakes wriggling free. Closer and closer they spiraled, weaving themselves into a single, pulsating sphere of radiant energy. Its brilliance grew exponentially, bathing the shattered cityscape in a molten gold glow. Ethan felt the heat on his skin before he could even see the power behind it. The orb swelled, veins of incandescent light snaking across its surface. The air crackled with raw force, so intense that Ethan doubted anything could survive its blast. He swallowed hard, squaring his shoulders. Despite the terror flooding his mind, he refused to be prey. Somewhere deep inside him, courage flickered, and he would need every ounce of it if he hoped to stand against the Parallax Beast's onslaught. The air around the energy orb shimmered with heat, rippling as though drawn toward an unseen vortex. The ground trembled beneath its power, a warning of the disaster to come. Then, without warning, the Parallax monster's maw snapped open and the orb hurtled to earth. Time itself seemed to pause for a heartbeat before a blinding golden shockwave erupted, coiling through the sky like a celestial dragon and crashing down in one indiscriminate, all-consuming sweep. Wherever that wave passed, matter simply vanished. Buildings buckled under an invisible force. Streets cracked and heaved, turning a once thriving city into a wasteland of rubble. Panicked screams filled the air as terrified citizens fled, tiny and defenseless before Parallax's wrath. In the ruined streets, Green Lantern Hal Jordan fought with all his might to resist the shockwave. He braced his feet against the cracking pavement and summoned every ounce of willpower to steady himself, but the sheer force still threatened to send him sprawling. Ethan's green power ring flared continuously, generating a shimmering emerald shield against the shockwave's relentless assault. Yet each blast from the enemy's energy sphere struck with such force that his barrier shuddered under the onslaught. Dizziness blurred his vision. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, and cold sweat trickled down his temples. He couldn't afford to falter, not when he wore the emblem of the Green Lantern Corps and was sworn to defend this world. Is this the very source of fear? Ethan's mind raced. He had never confronted an adversary so devastatingly powerful, one whose single blow could almost shatter his shield. But succumbing to dread would only make him weaker. Summoning every ounce of discipline, he drew a deep, steadying breath and closed his eyes. In that moment of calm, he reached out with his will, melding his consciousness with the ring's energy. He felt emerald currents surge through him, arteries of light fortifying his body from within. Focusing his resolve, he channeled that power into every fiber of his being, strengthening his defenses against the next strike. No sooner had he readied himself than the fear entity, Parallax, gathered its darkest energies into a single, colossal orb. It hovered before him, buzzing with malevolence, and then hurtled forward, its crimson core crackling with raw terror. Ethan braced himself, emerald gauntlet raised, but already he knew this was only the beginning of a battle that would test every limit of his courage. Ethan stared in disbelief as the energy sphere grew even brighter and stronger than before. It carved a brilliant arc through the sky and then plummeted earthward in a wildly erratic path. He swallowed hard, knowing he had to push himself to the limit if he stood any chance of stopping it. Focusing every ounce of will on the Green Lantern ring around his finger, Ethan unleashed a surge of emerald energy. A shimmering shield bloomed around him, casting everything in its vivid glow. But the orb's raw power was on another level, like an untamed star wreaking havoc across the void. When the energy sphere struck Ethan's barrier, The shield proved as flimsy as tissue paper. Agonizing pain lanced through him, as if thousands of razor-sharp blades were tearing at his very soul. He gritted his teeth and forced his will to keep the barrier intact, but it didn't last 10 seconds before it shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments. Then the sphere slammed into him with the force of an exploding sun. In that deafening moment, the world around Ethan vanished in a blinding flash of light. The blinding light seared Ethan's vision, and the blow sent him flying like a cannonball. He arced through the air, meteor-like, his body raked by 1,000 phantom claws, each one tearing at him so violently he nearly blacked out. But he refused to surrender. Gritting his teeth, he forced his eyes open and willed himself back toward the Parallax monster. He knew he stood no chance in a direct clash, yet if he fell here, Earth itself would be lost. Summoning every ounce of strength, Ethan flung himself in front of the creature, closing the distance in a desperate gambit. The monster's aura washed over him like a razor's edge, icy and malignant, but he didn't flinch. Drawing a shuddering breath, Ethan pressed the tip of his finger against his green lantern ring. "Green light! Give me your power!" His voice rang out across the rubble-strewn plain, taut with determination. But instead of the brilliant emerald glow he'd come to trust, the ring sputtered uncertainly, its light flickering and weak, like a lamp on the verge of dying. "Please," Ethan's voice cracked with desperation. He could feel his hope slipping away. If the ring's power faltered now, he wouldn't stand a chance against the Parallax monster. Just then, a gentle hand settled on his shoulder. Heart pounding, Ethan whirled around and froze. Standing beside him was a man clad in flawless white armor that gleamed with an ethereal blue light as if spun from the very stars themselves. No helmet crowned his head. His features were impossibly refined, strikingly human in appearance. Ethan swallowed hard, wonder and relief warring in his chest. He had no idea who this mysterious knight was, but at this moment it didn't matter. Help had arrived. Chapter 691, Absorption. Hal froze the moment he laid eyes on him. It had to be Ethan, the Galaxy Supervisor. For days on end, humanity had whispered about the Supervisor's impending judgment on Earth, speculating on his arrival and his power. So it wasn't a surprise that Hal knew his name. "Supervisor!" Hal exclaimed, relief and awe warping his voice. Can you deal with the Parallax monster?" Ethan offered a calm smile and inclined his head. "Of course." "That's why I came," Hal said, his voice nearly a whisper. Ethan's tone was gentle but resolute, a combination that settled Hal's racing heart. He radiated an authority so quiet and uncompromising that Hal felt safe just standing in his presence. Unseen by either of them, the Parallax monster sensed a new presence, an overwhelming force that had somehow evaded its notice until now. The creature bristled with surprise. It had believed its own fear-inducing aura was absolute. No living thing on Earth could resist its power of dread. Yet here was someone who not only ignored it but remained unmoved. Curiosity turned to unease as the monster probed Ethan's mind, expecting to find the raw terror that fueled its strength. But no matter how deeply it searched, it encountered nothing. No fear, no hesitation, no doubt. An emptiness, serene and impenetrable. Fear was the wellspring of the Parallax monster's power. How could there exist a being entirely without it? And yet the truth was undeniable. Ethan's heart was as still and unafraid as the void between the stars. Ethan is to the Parallax monster what sunlight is to a shadow, completely untouchable. He seems to exist without a single dark corner for fear to cling to, so no matter how fiercely the monster strikes, it leaves him unscathed. After all, why should you tremble before something that can't hurt you? For the Parallax monster, however, that thought is anathema. Its life force, its very power, comes from the fear of others. As long as living creatures quake in terror, it grows stronger. Confronted by someone utterly fearless, though, its power is wasted, like sunlight trying to fill in a shadow. "No, this is impossible." The monster's voice booms through the void, a thunder of disbelief. Its hollow, infinite eyes lock onto Ethan, an entity that should have crumbled beneath tides of golden fear energy, yet stands rock solid, untouched. All across the universe, the Parallax monster is known as the embodiment of fear itself, a cosmic terror that devours dread and wields it like a weapon. But here, in the silent expanse of space, its dreadlocked tendrils simply brush against Ethan and vanish. Ethan meets the monster's gaze, calm and unflinching. For the first time, the cosmic predator realizes that not every heart can be claimed by fear, and that a fearless soul may be its undoing. The parallax monster shuddered violently, its colossal form quivering as if on the brink of detonation. Across its skin, bands of golden light pulsed and shimmered, pure fear made manifest, the power capable of stirring terror in every living soul across the cosmos. Pointing straight at Ethan, the monstrous entity unfurled thousands of writhing tentacles like jagged blades, each one crackling with enough fear energy to shatter a world. Its cavernous maw stretched wide, as though it meant to swallow the entire universe in one gulp. "Fear come." The creature's voice rattled through the void like thunder, and a tidal wave of golden energy surged forth, battering Ethan with the raw essence of dread. Yet Ethan only tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips as the light washed over him. "What a beautiful color," he murmured, voice soft with genuine admiration. Hal Jordan, standing a few meters away, blinked at him in disbelief. "You're kidding, right?" Ethan shook his head, unruffled. "Golden fear. It's stunning. Besides, I happen to have a thing for color coordination. Yellow lanterns, blue lanterns, black lanterns. They've got style." Hal rolled his eyes so hard it was almost audible. But Ethan's grin never wavered. In the face of the universe's most primal terror, he'd found something worth appreciating, and somehow that was enough to keep him calm. Ethan stood his ground, arms relaxed at his sides, as the parallax monster unleashed its signature assault, a torrent of golden fear energy that shimmered like liquid sunlight. The wave of pure terror raced toward him, promising to shatter whatever lay in its path. Yet just as it neared, the golden aura collapsed in on itself and vanished, as if an unseen hand had swallowed it whole. Hal Jordan and the parallax both froze. Hal's voice cracked under the weight of his disbelief. "What just happened?" Ethan met his old friend's astonished gaze and answered calmly, "I absorbed it." "Absorbed?" Hal's eyes went wide. He'd witnessed Parallax's powers firsthand, how that insidious fear could warp minds, drive the bravest lanterns to madness, even kill. No one in the Green Lantern Corps had ever shrugged off an attack like that. Yet here was Ethan, as if deflecting the worst the universe could muster was as easy as catching a raindrop. The parallax monster reeled, its grotesque form quivering. It had roamed the cosmos for untold eons, feeding on fear, conquering worlds, and never once met anyone who could siphon off its power. Rage and terror flickered in its glowing eyes as it realized it had finally encountered resistance it couldn't terrify away. For the first time, the embodiment of fear itself was afraid. Ethan felt the air grow heavy around him as the parallax monster began to siphon every ounce of fear from the crowd, desperate to replenish its fading power. Invisible tendrils of terror slithered through the onlookers' hearts and coalesced into golden streams, all flowing toward the beast's yawning maw. Yet something astonishing happened. Each time that stolen energy neared Ethan, it simply vanished, evaporating into nothingness before it could reach him. Enraged, the parallax monster unleashed a deafening roar and flailed thousands of writhing tentacles, its massive tooth-lined jaws snapping like steel traps. Golden rays of concentrated fear shot down in a relentless torrent, a storm meant to drown Ethan in pure panic. But Ethan did not waver. He planted his feet firmly on the ground, let the glowing beams strike him, and watched with calm detachment as they fizzled away on contact. Watching from a distance, Hal's jaw dropped. Even the parallax monster itself staggered backward, its many eyes widening in disbelief. How is this possible?" it snarled, voice shaking with panic. It had always prided itself as one of the universe's most fearsome predators. Nothing had ever resisted, let alone undone, its power. Yet here stood Ethan, untouched and untroubled, drawing the monster's own stolen energy into oblivion. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. The parallax monster, once so confident, now found its arrogance shattered by this unassuming young man who absorbed its greatest weapon as if it were nothing more than a fleeting shadow. An unprecedented wave of fear and powerlessness washed over the parallax monster. Ethan met its terrified gaze and offered a faint, confident smile. "Fear isn't invincible," he said softly. "It's just an emotion, and every emotion can be mastered and used." He extended his hand. At first, only a tiny point of darkness shimmered in his palm, but it began to spin, slowly at first, then ever faster. The orb of shadow expanded until it became a yawning void, exuding a deep, mysterious aura as if it could devour the very world. Drawn by its gravity, the golden fear energy the parallax monster had unleashed streamed toward the void, and in an instant vanished into its depths as though it had never existed. Chapter 692, Hal is Tricked. As the black hole continued to consume the parallax monster's fear energy, the creature's once formidable power began to ebb. Its colossal form, which had blotted out the sky and sun, now sagged like a deflated balloon. Tentacles curled inward, and its skin lost its eerie sheen, turning dull and lifeless. "No, no! Let me go!" the parallax monster shrieked, its voice cracking with desperation, the last, frantic gasp of a dying hope. But the black hole paid no heed. It drew in each quivering wisp of fear energy with ruthless efficiency. "Let me go!" the monster wailed again, but its cries weakened as the final golden tendrils of fear were swallowed whole. Suddenly, the monster's shape collapsed. Flesh and tentacle contracted until, with a final spasm, it reverted to a small, desiccated figure, a blue-skinned man clad in ragged armor. He trembled where he stood, utterly spent. This was one of the Green Lantern Corps' cosmic guardians. Driven by ambition, he had sought to harness Parallax's unimaginable power, but the experiment had failed. The Parallax Force had stripped him of his will, transforming him into nothing more than a vessel of pure fear. Now, free of its energy, he stood empty and broken, the last reminder of a tragic overreach. The Guardians of the Universe once hailed from the world of Maltus, the oldest intelligent civilization in existence. Millennia ago, they mastered both technology and philosophy far beyond anyone else, but eventually concluded that emotions only hindered progress. To rid themselves of passion, they surgically removed the emotional lobes from their brains, and any guardian who dared show feeling would have that section excised on the spot. Of course, true emotion cannot be so neatly discarded. Gunther and his wife refused to surrender their love, left Oa to form the Blue Lantern Corps, and only years later did Gunther return. When the Infinite Crisis warped Oa's orbit and threw the Guardians into genuine fear, they finally understood how ill-equipped they were to confront it. Again, during the New 52's clash with the Yellow Lantern Corps, they watched supposed fearless betrayers quake ever so briefly, betraying the same dread they denied. It was this lingering terror that drove some Guardians to bind Parallax itself. They boast of knowing everything that transpires in the universe, but they have their blind spots. Ethan stood off to one side, observing it all in bafflement. He had no idea what he was witnessing. Ethan stood before the fallen creature, its massive form trembling in the aftermath of his intervention. Once, this monster had struck fear into the hearts of every Green Lantern, bringing the Corps to its knees. Now, it lay helpless at his feet. Hal Jordan's eyes widened with awe and confusion. He took a hesitant step forward, surveying the subdued beast. "Ethan, how did you do it? This is the same Parallax entity that's tormented the Corps for as long as anyone can remember." Ethan lowered his hand and allowed himself a faint smile. His voice was calm, brimming with quiet confidence. "The threat is neutralized. It's over." Hal shook his head, struggling to reconcile what he'd believed impossible with the sight before him. The Green Lantern Corps, established by the Guardians of the Universe 10 billion years ago, staffed by the bravest souls in creation, had survived every major conflict the galaxy could throw at it. Yet Parallax had remained beyond their reach, a specter they could neither contain nor destroy. After a moment's hesitation, Hal finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Supervisor, why didn't you take action against Parallax sooner? Why let the Corps bear this burden alone for all these years?" Ethan met Hal's gaze, his expression steady. "I've been watching, waiting for the right moment. Until now, intervening directly would have risked even greater harm. But once I had the full measure of Parallax's power, I could end it without collateral damage." Hal frowned, absorbing the answer. "So you knew Al along, and you chose this moment to step in?" Ethan nodded. "Sometimes patience and precision are the greatest strengths. The Corps defended the galaxy admirably, but tonight was mine to finish." Silence fell between them, as the enormity of Ethan's words sank in. The ancient menace was gone, and for the first time in countless eons, peace would reign, thanks to the quiet authority of the Galactic Supervisor. Centered on Oa, the universe is divided into 3,600 sectors, each one guarded by at least a single Green Lantern. By that count, more than 7,200 lanterns stand watch across the cosmos. Yet Hal had never heard mention of a Galactic Supervisor until now. So when he saw Ethan, the Supervisor, unleash that awe-inspiring power, Hal was struck speechless. In that moment, any lingering doubts about Ethan's true station vanished, but an even deeper question took their place. If the Galactic Supervisor wielded such tremendous power, why had they remained on the sidelines while the Parallax monster laid waste to world after world? The Green Lantern Corps had paid a terrible price to defeat Parallax. Countless lanterns had fallen. Had the Supervisor intervened sooner, so many lives might have been spared. Hal's brow furrowed as he dared to voice his concerns. Ethan regarded him with a calm, knowing smile and replied, "Hal, your question reaches behind the very veil of the universe." Ethan fixed Hal with a steady gaze. "Before we begin, I need to know, in what capacity are you asking me this question?" Hal started, taken aback by Ethan's sudden directness. He hesitated, mind racing. He'd never considered that such depth could lie behind a simple inquiry. Finally, he met Ethan's eyes and asked, "Does it really matter?" Ethan's expression grew even more determined as he inclined his head. "Absolutely. If you were just an ordinary human, someone curious about the cosmos and eager to explore, I'd answer differently. Your perspective on the universe is still limited. Much remains distant and profound, beyond your current grasp." He paused, his tone lowering to a solemn hum. "But if you're asking as a Green Lantern Corps messenger, that changes everything." Hal drew a steadying breath, feeling the full weight of Ethan's words settle over him. Ethan watched the Green Lantern messenger steady his breathing, as if preparing to speak in the face of a cosmic tribunal. The Lantern, though plainly an Earthling by birth, carried on his shoulders the weight of the Corps' solemn mandate, to uphold peace and order across the universe. At last he spoke, voice calm but firm. "I speak to you as a Green Lantern." Ethan inclined his head and met the Lantern's gaze. "We approach Parallax from very different standpoints," he began, choosing his words deliberately. "To the Green Lantern Corps, Parallax is an enemy that must be destroyed, because you believe its very presence threatens to shatter the peace you've sworn to protect, bringing suffering and despair to every world it touches." He paused, letting the Lantern absorb that. Then Ethan continued in a softer tone, "But for us, observers or supervisors of the cosmos, Parallax means something else entirely." His voice grew low and measured. "Imagine the degradation and decay you see on Earth when nature falls out of balance. It inflicts ruin and anguish, yes, but it also plays a role in the planet's life cycle. Every world, every star system, every galaxy lives and dies in a cycle of renewal. When a world can no longer heal itself, Parallax appears to accelerate its decline, clearing the way for rebirth. In its own terrible fashion, it restores balance." Ethan leaned back, folding his arms. "As supervisors, we have always lived by a single, unbreakable principle. We observe, but we do not interfere. We honor the natural laws governing every living being in each world, and we intervene only in the most extreme circumstances, because once that balance is broken, the consequences can be far more severe." Chapter 693, Sinestro. When you're at home, courtesy comes from heaven. Hal Jordan stood in stunned silence. He'd never suspected that a single question could carry such weight or that the Parallax entity held such cosmic significance. Until now, his understanding of Parallax had been shallow. He'd seen it merely as another malevolent force to be opposed. But Ethan's words cut deeper, forcing him to confront how little he truly knew. "The Monitor's purpose," Ethan said, his voice calm and unwavering, "isn't to destroy evil. It's to preserve the universe's balance." Those words took root in Hal's mind. He realized he'd been viewing everything through a simple lens of good versus evil, never considering the broader tapestry of cosmic stability. If balance unraveled, no amount of heroism could set things right. But even as one question fell into place, another sprang up. Hal found his voice at last. "If balance is your goal, why act now? Why intervene at this moment?" Ethan inclined his head thoughtfully. "Because the scales have tipped too far. The Green Lantern Corps lies in ruins, and Earth's guardians are stretched thin. Parallax isn't content with seeds of fear, It's feasting on hope itself. Every moment we wait, it grows stronger, and the universe drifts closer to chaos. Hal's jaw tightened. He knew Ethan spoke the truth, so we step in to restore equilibrium before it's lost forever. Ethan let out a steady breath. Exactly. We owe it to every corner of creation, not out of vengeance or conquest, but out of duty, to keep the cosmic order intact. In that charged silence, Hal finally saw the path before him. A mission not just to fight evil, but to safeguard the very fabric of reality. And at Ethan's side, he would do whatever it took to tip the balance back toward hope. Why would you abandon our long-held creed of observe and never interfere? Hal asked, turning toward Ethan as the violet glow of Viridian Prime's twin suns washed over the observation deck. Ethan offered a faint, rueful smile. Because the universe has changed. Our policy made sense when cosmic forces tended toward self-regulation. But when an ecosystem, any ecosystem, tips into chaos, neutrality only invites disaster. Think of Earth. If an invasive species overruns a habitat, biologists don't stand by. They step in to restore balance. Hal nodded, picturing shepherds culling an overgrown flock of sheep to save a parched grassland. In that instant, he grasped the paradox he'd never considered. The parallax beast, the ravenous force he'd always labeled an enemy, was also a crucial element in the cosmic equilibrium. Ethan's expression grew serious. Now its power has outstripped all controls. It no longer confines itself to hastening the decay of planets and galaxies. Its appetite has become indiscriminate, threatening entire star systems, even the stability of the universe itself. If we cling to non-intervention, that void will consume everything. He leaned forward, hands planted firmly on the cool metal table. Our doctrine of non-interference served us well, but it was never absolute. When the scales tip too far, we must adapt our principles to safeguard reality itself. Ethan folded his arms and regarded Hal with calm authority. When the universe's balance is disturbed, he began, it's our responsibility to step in and restore harmony. Hal's eyes widened as the weight of Ethan's words sank in. His previous notions about parallax creatures and cosmic equilibrium now seemed woefully incomplete. With a swift, respectful bow, he said, "Thank you for setting me straight, Ethan. I won't forget this lesson." Ethan offered a warm nod. "Good. Our discussion is done. Now go. Return to the Green Lantern Corps and share the news." "Yes, sir," Hal replied, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. He felt a surge of awe for the Galaxy Monitor hierarchy. He realized that if the universe were an ecosystem, the Green Lanterns would be just one link in the chain, brave and vital, but ultimately beneath the Monitors in authority. The Monitors could intervene, at any level, ensuring balance or preventing catastrophe. In comparison, Hal and his fellow Lanterns were like creatures under their protection, guided by forces far greater than themselves. Clutching the Parallax Guardian's containment orb, Hal lifted off into the starlit void. His destination, Oa. There, he would deliver both the grateful creature and Ethan's teachings to the core he called family, so they, too, might understand the true scope of their cosmic mandate. Sinestro's emerald eyes widened the moment Hal Jordan stepped into the briefing chamber, cradling something that glowed with an otherworldly light. Curious, Sinestro demanded, "What is that, Jordan?" Hal took a steadying breath. "It isn't Earth, or any weapon we made, that destroyed the parallax-corrupted monster. It was the Monitor of the universe." A stunned silence rippled through the assembled lanterns. Hal went on to describe how, at the last moment of the battle, a massive, Ouroboros-like construct had shattered Parallax's hold on the planet. The energy wave that followed obliterated the monster. No Green Lantern did it, not even his own so-called explosive seed. It was the Monitor. When Hal finished, disbelief painted every face. Sinestro alone seemed deep in thought. As one of the Corps' most learned members, he prided himself on knowing every corner of the cosmos, and yet he had never encountered any record of a Monitor of the universe. A monitor? Sinestro's voice was low, edged with incredulity. "I have studied ancient texts, Corps archives, everything. I've never heard of such a being." Hal stared at him, puzzled. "You're saying you've never even heard the name? You're one of our greatest lanterns. How could this escape you?" Sinestro offered a thin smile. "Either my reputation outstrips my knowledge, or your monitors are more elusive than any intelligence we've managed to gather." He let the words hang in the air. Then he turned and studied Hal and the glowing orb in his arms with a new intensity. Off to the side, Ethan folded his arms, absorbing the exchange in silence. He'd been half expecting some last-minute miracle, but he'd never imagined the Corps' savior would be an entity older than they could conceive. Hal's revelation left him uneasy. If this monitor truly existed and had the power to destroy Parallax, what else lay hidden in the dark corners of the universe? Sinestro finally shook out of his reverie. "Prepare a full report," he ordered. "If the monitors are real, we need to know everything we can, now." As the lanterns dispersed to relay the news, Ethan exchanged a glance with Hal. This was just the beginning of a mystery that might reshape the Green Lantern Corps and the fate of every world under its protection. Ethan knew that the Guardians of the Universe were the earliest sentient beings in all creation, which naturally made him skeptical of anyone claiming the title of Monitor. Yet when this mysterious figure, dubbed the Inspector by some, effortlessly subdued the Parallax entity that had once threatened the Green Lantern Corps, Sinestro quietly admitted to himself that the Monitor's identity must be genuine. After all, in the cosmos, power often defines reality, and Ethan's abilities were beyond question. Sinestro had listened carefully to Hal's account of Ethan's intervention, and by now understood exactly who this cosmic custodian was. It wasn't surprising that the Corps had never encountered a universe-balancing force like him before. Their missions usually stirred only local ripples, never tipping the grand equilibrium. So when Hal returned escorting the bound Parallax, Sinestro's excitement was palpable. He had already forged a new power ring, but he needed time to master its capabilities. Once he did, he was certain he could bend the Parallax entity to his own will. He had never imagined that Parallax would arrive at his doorstep unbidden. Masking his eagerness with politeness, Sinestro told Hal he would confine and study the creature immediately. With a curt nod, he led the way to his private chamber, leaving Hal and the rest of the Corps to wonder what secrets and powers Sinestro intended to unlock next. Ethan Jordan didn't hesitate. When the Parallax entity writhed in his grasp, he simply handed it over to Sinestro. He trusted the veteran Lantern's judgment more than his own, despite the Guardian's constant whispers that he was unworthy. No sooner did Sinestro secure the creature's containment ring than he turned his back on Oa and departed. He'd grown tired of the Guardian's cold bureaucracy. If the Corps couldn't live up to its own ideals, he would build a new one in his own image. Sinestro always believed himself a hero, though his methods were ruthless. To him, imposing order demanded discipline, and he enforced it with an iron will. His conviction and authoritarian rule eventually led the Green Lantern Corps to strip him of his ring and confine him. Now, with Parallax in tow, he intended to start anew. Back on Earth, orbital relays beamed the entire exchange into Coast City's living rooms and beyond. Bruce Wayne sat in the Batcave, watching the unsettling footage unfold across multiple monitors. He'd never expected the Guardians to intervene so directly. Was Parallax truly an alien invader on the level of a Kryptonian warlord, or was something even more sinister at work? Bruce's attention, however, kept drifting to the Lantern who had stood beside Sinestro, Ethan Jordan. He'd heard rumors of this rookie, of his courage, his unpredictability, and his raw talent. A Green Lantern on Earth could be exactly the ally the Justice League needed. Without a second thought, Batman suited up, climbed into the Batwing, and launched for Coast City, determined to meet Ethan Jordan face to face. Uncovering Hal's true identity is surprisingly simple. His clothing gives him away entirely. Chapter 694, City of Angels. Hal Jordan's disguise was never much of one. He figured a pair of green tights and a simple domino mask would do the trick, and he never even bothered to change his hairstyle. Of course, that was only one reason it took Batman less than a day to unmask him. The world's greatest detective had little trouble connecting the dots, and soon enough, Bruce Wayne showed up at Hal's apartment unannounced. Earlier that week, Hal had tried to save the world. Technically, he'd failed, but he'd given it his all. And in the midst of cosmic threats and interstellar battles, he'd also managed to win the heart of his childhood sweetheart, the daughter of his company's CEO. With her father's blessing, he felt invincible. And then, Batman? Hal stood frozen as the huge, bat-shaped silhouette filled his doorway. Recognition fluttered through his mind, but before he could think twice, muscle memory took over. Trained from the moment he arrived on Oa to shift into his ring-empowered armor at a moment's notice, he tapped his power ring, and his Green Lantern uniform snapped into place across his body, the brilliant green glow illuminating the room. In one impulsive motion, Hal had blown his cover, and now faced the Dark Knight in full emerald regalia. Under that cowl, Batman's eyes narrowed, quietly cataloging every detail. Hal swallowed. This was it. The moment his double life collided with Gotham's greatest detective. Batman's voice was low and steady as he spoke into the darkness. "Hello, Green Lantern? Or should I call you Hal? What brings you all the way from Gotham City?" Ethan, once known in Gotham's underworld for his ruthless operations codenamed Transcendence, Terminator, and Death, still remembered Batman. In those days, most Americans jokingly hailed the Dark Knight as the true Captain America. Sure, DC and Marvel were just comic book rivalries, but when Batman rallied heroes worldwide to form the Justice League, it felt like something out of a blockbuster. Ethan had no interest in theatrics or conventions of superhero camaraderie. He had more pressing matters on his mind. Now he had tracked his quarry to Los Angeles, the city of angels, ever vibrant beneath its neon skyline. After dusk, the city never slept. Highways glowed with taillights, skyscrapers blinked like digital constellations, and a restless energy pulsed through every crowded street. But amid this electric bustle, one man's world was unraveling. In a quiet back alley, the sorcerer John Constantine found himself in dire straits, his fate hanging by a thread, or perhaps by a single, desperate spell. And Ethan had come to collect. Ethan's face was drawn and hollowed, his eyes shadowed by fatigue and despair. Life had battered him endlessly, but these past few weeks felt like the cruelest blow of all. Once, his name carried weight. Now Ethan seemed barely more than a whisper lost in the wind. 2 decades of cigarettes had carved deep grooves in his lungs. Now, lying in the sterile hush of the hospital room, he clutched the diagnosis sheet, stage 4 of lung cancer, as though it were a sharpened blade pressing against his ribs. Every cough sent searing pain through his chest, as if 1,000 hot needles were driven into his core. The doctor's words had sliced through him with merciless precision. Late-stage lung cancer. Ethan stared at the paper, his breath catching. He blinked, disbelieving. "I've only smoked for 20 years, he said, voice trembling. "I know people who've smoked for 70 or 80 and never had a thing." The doctor, standing with cool detachment, folded his arms. "Cancer doesn't follow a simple rulebook," he said quietly. "Some patients endure decades of exposure without issue. Others, with fewer years of smoking, develop it much earlier. It depends on genetics, environmental factors, even random chance. I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton." Ethan drew in a shaky breath, pressing the sheet against his chest as though seeking solace in its thin paper. Fear and helplessness welled up inside him. He had survived so much already, lost friends in wars he'd never wanted to fight, watched dreams evaporate in the haze of hardship. But this felt final. Outside, the corridor lights flickered. Somewhere beyond these walls, life was carrying on. And yet here, in this stark hospital bed, Ethan felt the world contract to the single word scrawled on the page. Cancer. He closed his eyes against the pain and the panic, determined that even if hope was slipping through his fingers, he would not let go without a fight. "Ethan," Dr. Harris said, sliding his clipboard aside with a heavy sigh, "we need to talk about these test results, and frankly, about your smoking habit. 3 packs a day? I'm honestly surprised you've held out this long. You must have the strongest lungs I've ever seen." Ethan stared at the floor, too deflated to argue. He'd known this appointment was inevitable. Images of his past life, clouded apartments, midnight coughing fits, endless hospital visits, flashed through his mind. His reckless habits had come at a steep price. But even that grim reality paled next to the other battle raging in his soul. Over the past months, he'd become painfully aware that someone in hell had singled him out. Lucifer himself, in all his grandiosity, had taken an interest in Ethan's soul. He'd promised to come in person to escort Ethan into the darkness when the time came. The thought of such a fate, receiving a personal invitation from Satan, was both perversely flattering and utterly terrifying. Ethan refused to be dragged into that abyss. Determined to escape damnation, he launched a frantic search for salvation. He called every priest in the directory, begged a visiting Buddhist monk for a blessing, even scoured occult forums for exorcists or spirit mediums. If he couldn't outrun death, maybe he could at least sell his soul to heaven before hell claimed it. Ethan had once believed that if he could win heaven's favor, he might finally escape both the relentless agony of his sickness and the dread of eternal punishment. But life proved crueler than hope. To a man with his reputation, the gates of heaven remained firmly shut, and as far as he could tell, even hell had no use for him. Despair settled in his bones. He couldn't bear the thought of surrendering to the darkness, though, so he threw himself into every possible remedy. Experimental drugs, obscure therapies, prayer circles, you name it, he tried it. All of it failed. His body grew weaker, his mind more desolate with each passing day. Just when Ethan felt he was teetering on the brink of panic, a police cruiser pulled up outside his shabby apartment. Officer Angela Ramirez stepped into his life, carrying a case so strange she'd driven miles just to find him. She needed his help. Angela paused in the center of his cluttered living room and drew a slow, steadying breath. Then she began her story. Her younger sister Isabel had been raised a devout Catholic, her faith unshakable. But lately, Isabel had grown withdrawn, even ominous, insisting she could see things no one else could perceive. Things with horns and claws, the devil himself. Ethan studied Angela's tense features, the desperate look in her eyes. He was dying. He was damned. And yet, something about this case, the promise of a desperate mystery, stirred a flicker of resolve in him. He would help her, whatever it took. From the moment Isabel's behavior grew increasingly erratic, those around her whispered in concern, and before long, she was committed to St. Mary's Psychiatric Hospital for observation. For years, the doctors ran every test and assessment they could think of. They monitored her sleep patterns, scanned her brain, analyzed her blood, yet nothing at all proved physically or mentally amiss. Just as they were preparing to release her, Isabel stunned everyone by climbing to the roof one morning and plunging to her death. When Angela heard the news, her world fell apart. She had watched her sister suffer, desperately hoping faith would be her salvation, but now Isabel was gone. "Suicide bars the way to heaven," Angela said, her voix ice-choked with grief. Even a devout believer faces damnation if she takes her own life. She had appealed to the church for a proper Catholic funeral, clinging to the last shreds of hope, and been turned away. As Isabel's sister, Angela refused to accept such an ending for the woman she loved most. Chapters 6 and 95, The Pitfall. The church had declared that Isabel's death was a suicide, her soul forever tainted and ineligible for baptism. Angela was left devastated and directionless. Desperate for answers, she followed a friend's recommendation and sought out Ethan. He was waiting in a quiet, dimly lit room, the only light coming from a hearth's low glow. Ethan sat behind a sturdy wooden desk, his posture relaxed but alert. As Angela poured out her story, her sister's tragic end, the church's damning verdict, her own frantic need for justice, he listened without interrupting. The flickering firelight played across his face, revealing a man at once compassionate and unflinchingly pragmatic. He had built his life on self-interest and clear-eyed realism, well aware of the world's darkness and his own limits. "Miss Angela," he said at last, his voice low and cool like fine-cut stone, "I empathize deeply with the pain you and your sister have endured." He paused, folding his hands on the desk. "But you must understand that life rarely divides neatly into right and wrong. No matter how hard we fight, some forces, some judgments, can't be overturned by goodwill alone." Angela's shoulders slumped. For a moment, it seemed she would simply accept his words and turn away. Then Ethan rose, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "Nevertheless," he said, "I agree to help you. I refuse to accept that Isabel's death was as simple as it appears. I will see this through, no matter where I must go." Though every official record pointed to suicide, Ethan would not let the matter rest. If necessary, he would dare to enter the very depths of hell itself to uncover the truth behind Isabel's final moments. And with that promise, his true journey began. Ethan's unique gift let him slip for a moment beyond the veil that separates life and death, a passage no ordinary person could fathom. In his first crossing, he hovered at death's edge for 2 excruciating minutes. The searing pain and crushing despair he endured there gave him a first-hand understanding of true torment. Summoning every ounce of will, Ethan pushed past that boundary again, stepping into a realm of shadows and flames. He stood at hell's ragged threshold. Around him writhed horrors beyond mortal nightmares, grotesque demons clawing at the air, skeletal warriors rising from ash. Yet one by one he faced them down, his resolve acting as both shield and sword. Deeper still he journeyed, through corridors of wailing souls and rivers of molten sorrow, until he found her at last. Isabel's spirit hovered in a dim, broken landscape, her form flickering like a candle in a storm. She recognized him immediately, eyes half lost in mist, but still alight with recognition. "Ethan," she whispered, voice trembling. I ended my life because I could no longer bear the world's abandonment or the betrayal of my own faith. But my death wasn't the end. It was the first move in a far darker game." Isabel's words sent a chill through him. She spoke of hidden manipulations, of forces pulling strings from the shadows, of a conspiracy that reached far beyond any one broken soul. Then, as her essence began to fade, she entrusted him with the truth, urging him to expose the architects of her suffering. When Ethan emerged back in the living world, his heart weighed heavy with what he'd witnessed. He found Angela waiting. At first, she could only stare, disbelief and sorrow waging a war in her eyes. Then the tears came, and she sobbed, grief for Isabel, fear for Ethan, and anger at the injustice they'd uncovered. Wiping away her tears, Angela placed a determined hand on his shoulder. "We'll bring them down," she vowed, "together." From that moment, Ethan's quest changed. No longer was he simply a man with a rare power. He was a hunter in a deadly conspiracy, and he would track the mastermind hiding in the shadows, no matter the cost. Ethan, the warlock who walked the razor's edge between life and death, furrowed his brow as he studied the clues laid out before him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was far more than a simple skirmish. Some vast conspiracy was at work, and unraveling it might be his only ticket out of the infernal fate that awaited him. Profit-driven and self-serving by nature, Ethan treated deception not as a sin but as another tool in his arsenal. Yet, as he pieced together fragmentary leads, a single name kept rising to the surface: Baldasha. In the shadowy underbelly of Los Angeles, Baldasha was whispered of in fearful tones, an insatiable devil whose power was matched only by the cruelty of his followers. Monsters and misguided mortals who worshipped the flames of hell did his bidding without question, willing to spill blood in pursuit of their master's grand designs. Knowing he faced an enemy of immeasurable reach, Ethan realized he couldn't afford to proceed alone. Clues were scarce, and time was against him. Desperation left him with no choice but to turn to Midnight, better known in the city's criminal circuits as Midnight Daddy. A notorious intel broker whose web of contacts spanned every dark corner of LA. If Ethan hoped to survive, and to expose the conspiracy that threatened to drag him into damnation, he would need all of Midnight's resources at his disposal. Ethan hovered above the ruined cityscape, his gaze fixed on the dozen, or was it 100? Hellish forms encircling John Constantine and his companion, Angela. The creatures seeped through the shattered streets, each more grotesque than the last. Scales like cracked obsidian, eyes that gleamed with merciless cruelty, and twisted limbs that seemed to drip with brimstone. Then, as if summoned by their very fear, a new figure emerged from the shadows, Baldasha, his robes swirling in an otherworldly wind. He raised one gauntleted hand, and the demons surged forward, a living tide of malice. Constantine steadied himself, shoulders squared, but Angela barely held back a cry of alarm. Ethan drew in a slow breath and descended. He'd never ventured into this side of the DC Cosmos's underworld before. The Supreme Funman had granted him the authority of an archangel, power that rivaled even Gabriel and Michael, yet he had never faced Lucifer himself. Rumors said the Morning Star had set up a bar here in Los Angeles, but tonight, Lucifer was nowhere to be seen. Below him, Constantine locked eyes with Ethan, anguish and defiance warring in his stare. Behind Constantine's back, Baldasha hissed an incantation, and the demons pressed closer, claws raking the earth, eager to taste blood. Ethan hovered, wings folded, indecision tugging at him. He had come to this world to find Lucifer, nothing more. Constantine was, in his own words, the scum king of the occult. Why should Ethan risk himself on behalf of a man who'd called every demon in hell down upon them? A sudden flash of steel broke the momentary stalemate. Constantine's hand whipped out a relic wrapped in cloth, a tattered fragment of the garment Moses wore on Sinai. Even under the moonlight, its fabric glowed with an inner radiance. The demons recoiled at the sight, claws flexing in hesitation. Baldasha snarled, fingers twisting into new runes of fire, but Ethan's resolve snapped into place. This was more than a distraction, more than a brawl for pride. It was a test of faith and power, or a chance to witness something far greater than Lucifer's bar. Ethan's wings unfurled, the air trembling with celestial force. The skies above Los Angeles shimmered as he prepared to decide where his loyalties truly lay, and whether he would stand aside or join the battle to come. The garment Moses wore when he ascended Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments is more than a mere piece of cloth. It is a sacred relic of profound symbolic power in Judaism. Worn at the very moment God revealed himself to Moses, and at the head of the Exodus from Egypt, this vestment bore witness to Moses' unique role as prophet and national leader. It carried the divine energy to dispel evil and darkness. In Jewish tradition, Moses ranks as the greatest prophet after God himself. Under his guidance, the Israelites escaped slavery, embraced the 10 Commandments, and became the first people in history to unite under a single monotheistic faith. Though Moses belongs to a religious tradition distinct from that of Jesus and the 12 apostles, his authority in Judaism is unparalleled. Jesus, as the founder of Christianity, holds supreme status within his own faith. Likewise, Moses occupies a similarly exalted position as the founder of Judaism. Each stands as the pivotal figure in his respective tradition. Ethan's eyes flickered with curiosity as he stared at the tiny shard of cloth, said to be a fragment of Moses' holy garment. Before anyone could stop him, he lunged forward and plucked it from the altar. Across the chamber, Constantine was preparing to burn that very fragment, hoping its purifying flame would cleanse the writhing demons bound at his feet. But just as he raised his hand, a sudden gust of wind tore across the room and dislodged the relic. It tumbled through the air, landing squarely in Ethan's upstretched palm. "Damn it!" Constantine swore, rushing forward. "My fragment of the holy garment!" Ethan studied the cloth, gently rubbing its fibers between his fingers. "It certainly holds power," he murmured, "but nothing beyond the bounds of this world." He knew precious little about the garment's true composition, but he was far less eager to possess it than he was the spearhead of Longinus. The spear of Longinus, stained by Christ's own blood, was fabled to slay gods. One thrust could fell an archangel. Ethan had already tested the theory. Gabriel and his fellow archangels proved impressively formidable, yet each turned out to be nothing more than a clone, lacking the strength of the original. He had hoped to snatch the real thing for himself. Realizing his blunder, Constantine scrambled, face pale. With a muttered curse, he reached into his cloak and produced another relic, something shimmering, promising, and wholly unexpected. Chapter 696, No Compensation for Killing Someone. Constantine's true gift lies in trickery and deception. Every artifact he carries is wrapped in its own legend. He couldn't be more different from the stereotypical wizard in flowing robes, staff in hand. He rarely casts a spell himself. After years of adventuring, he's learned that while magic can be devastatingly powerful, it often carries unpredictable and sometimes dire costs. So Constantine prefers to outthink his opponents. He relies on cunning strategies, careful investigation, shrewd bargaining, and the odd enchanted trinket rather than raw sorcery. When a crisis hits, he's already 2 steps ahead, pulling friends and even reluctant foes into his schemes. With strangers, he uses persuasion, flattery, or subtle bribery. With allies, he gently reminds them of past favors owed. Now, as a horde of demons surges toward them, he isn't the least bit rattled. In his hand gleams a simple silver cross, a treasure he once acquired by chance. Blessed by an archbishop during the Crusades, it pulses with potent sacred power, a perfect counterweight to the encroaching darkness. Ethan forged the silver ingot into a custom brass knuckle, sleek, lightweight, and deadly. Gripping it tightly, he swung with all his might, pummeling the writhing demons that surged around him. Each brutal blow was met with a shriek of agony and a wisp of black smoke swirling into the night air. As he fought, Ethan kept one eye on the battlefield's ebb and flow, searching for an opening to draw the creatures away from the civilians still trapped in the square. But in the midst of his ferocious assault, disaster struck. With a final overzealous swing, the brass knuckle slipped from his grasp and flew across the courtyard. Ethan's heart stopped. He froze in place, eyes wide. No, he gasped. He couldn't believe it. He'd wielded that weapon with pinpoint precision just moments ago. Now it lay lost somewhere in the darkness. He cursed under his breath. His hands felt heavier than they should, as if his strength was draining away. The wind had already ripped at the edges of his holy cloth. No great loss, but this careless mistake stung him to the core. Was his lung cancer finally catching up with him, eroding his control? Blinded by frustration, Ethan darted his gaze back and forth, searching the shadows for any sign of the gleaming metal edge. But the night offered no mercy. The courtyard was a maze of overturned carts and fleeing citizens. In that chaos, the small brass knuckle was gone. Rage and regret surged through him, mingling with the smoky stench of the demon's dying breath. Without his improvised weapon, he was vulnerable. And yet, despite the setback, he knew he had to press on. The innocent lives at stake left him no choice, and so he inhaled deeply, steeled himself, and prepared to face the night's horrors unarmed. Ethan cursed under his breath. He needed every tool he had, and fast. Though he'd gathered arcane tomes and enchanted relics from every corner of the globe, most of them were safely stashed in his friend Chase's hidden storeroom. On him now were only a few essentials. With shaking hands, he fumbled for a small glass vial he prized above all else, years' worth of holy water, consecrated by a Vatican exorcist and daily blessed by the archbishop and choir. Its purity was unmatched, a last resort lifeline he would never waste unless absolutely necessary. He raised the vial, ready to use it, when his foot slipped on a slick patch of stone. In an instant, he was off balance, pitching forward. The precious vial flew from his grasp and shattered against the floor. "No!" Ethan lunged, but it was too late. He pounded the stone with his fist, fury and despair crashing in on him. Decades of careful collection, gone in a single heartbeat. The holy water that had seen him through impossible dangers lay ruined, and with it his greatest hope. "Bastard! My holy water!" Constantine's cry echoed through the chamber as the vial slipped from his grasp and shattered on the flagstones. His eyes went wide with panic. Ethan laughed, a cold, satisfied sound. Watching Constantine flail like an amphibian trodden underfoot was far more entertaining than any duel. Without his sacred tools, Constantine was powerless, just another street sorcerer begging for mercy. And if he died, so much the better. Ethan's mind drifted back to the events of the original storyline. John Constantine, the comics had shown, could imbue his flesh with magic enough to withstand a full-strength blast from Darkseid, though that Darkseid might have been a mere clone. With nothing but a single talisman, he'd even rendered himself invisible to the First Fallen. Preposterous. Of course, the First Fallen himself was probably just another imitation puppet. Angela, by contrast, was never truly endangered. The legion of demons relied on her living power. The real threat in play was far more calculated. For years, Mammon, Prince of Hell and direct scion of Satan, had plotted his return, his ambition nothing less than to unleash hellfire and bloodshed upon this unsuspecting world. To realize this infernal design, he wove an unprecedented conspiracy, securing as his ally the Archangel Gabriel. And now, at the edge of disaster, the pieces were finally slipping into place. Gabriel had once been among the most beloved of heaven's angels, endowed with immense power and profound wisdom. But as centuries passed, her faith in humanity faltered. She watched, again and again, how even the vilest sinners could secure God's forgiveness simply by offering genuine repentance, and she came to see such mercy as a grave injustice. In her eyes, mankind did not deserve this endless grace. Driven by rancor, Gabriel devised a dark experiment. She would unleash the very torments of hell upon earth, forcing humanity to confront fear and despair. Only by enduring such trials, she believed, could humans prove their worthiness, and only those who survived the crucible of suffering would emerge noble enough to earn God's favor. To bring her scheme to life, Gabriel formed an unholy alliance with Mammon, the demon of greed. Together, they scoured the world for the perfect instruments of their plan, and found them in a pair of identical twin sisters. Born with the rare gift of spirit sight, the twins could perceive ghosts and other otherworldly beings as though they stood in plain daylight. Gabriel and Mammon recognized that these sisters, bound by blood and by extraordinary power, would make the ideal vessels for summoning hell's forces into the mortal realm. With their pawns in place, Gabriel's conspiracy moved from secret design to active execution, and the peace of the world trembled on the brink of unimaginable torment. First, Mammon and Gabriel manipulated Ethan into convincing his sister to end her own life, dooming her soul to hell. With one sister trapped in the abyss and the other still on Earth, their natural soul link formed the perfect conduit for Mammon's entry into the mortal world. Although Mammon is the son of Satan and holds great rank in hell, his infernal blood lacks the sanctity of Christ's. To cross over, he must be guided by the pure blood of God. Gabriel set out to find a relic capable of drawing down that divine blood, and at last unearthed the fabled spear of Longinus, the very lance that pierced Jesus' side and was stained with his holy blood. As the Son of God, Jesus' blood is the purest essence of the divine. With the spear in hand and every detail in place, Mammon and Gabriel enacted their final plan. They led Ethan's surviving sister to the exact spot where her sibling died, the liminal crossroads between life and death, between earth and hell. There, with all conditions fulfilled, Mammon's long-awaited rebirth would be complete. Chapter 697, Master of Scams. In the midst of their dark, tightly woven conspiracy, Ethan proved to be an unexpected and insurmountable obstacle. His soul had long since been claimed by the Supreme Master, positioning him like a crucial chess piece on a cosmic board. If Ethan were to die, the Supreme Master himself would surely appear to reclaim that soul, and in doing so would expose Mammon and Gabriel's entire plot. Despite being universally reviled by gods, ghosts, and mortals alike, Ethan survived their brutal onslaught. The demons, fueled by hatred and vengeance, unleashed a merciless attack. They pummeled him until his face was unrecognizable, stripped him of every shred of clothing, and left him naked and bleeding. Then they tossed him into a grimy corner, as if he were nothing more than discarded trash. Ethan lay there, battered and bruised, every breath a struggle, but he was alive. He clung to that fragile thread of life, because he knew what awaited him if he died. The Supreme Master's grim reaper would come calling, and in that moment, Mammon and Gabriel's scheme would unravel. But while Ethan endured in the shadows, his twin sister Angela faced a darker fate. Bound to him by an unbreakable psychic link, she could not escape their tormentors. The demons snatched her away with savage glee, dragging her screaming into the depths of their domain, an abduction that would force Ethan to rise again or see everything he stood for destroyed. Angela had been dragged into a remote, decaying asylum, an eerie place where a horrifying ritual was already underway. Hidden beneath flickering lights and peeling paint, a ring of demons had assembled, their twisted chants echoing through the corridors. Ethan's blood ran cold at the sight. Anger and helplessness warred in his chest. How could he have been left behind? How could Angela have been thrown into such a nightmare? Ignoring the agony racking his own body, he had pursued them relentlessly, determined to learn the truth. At last, he uncovered the unspeakable secret. Mammon, the son of hell, was on the brink of crossing over into their world. The revelation struck Ethan like a physical blow. He knew that if Mammon broke through, darkness and chaos would spread unchecked across the earth. The very thought was unbearable, and he refused to stand by. His only clue had led him here, to this forsaken asylum, the same place where Angela's sister had once taken her own life. Now its empty wards and shuttered windows served as the stage for a demon's unholy carnival. Silently, Ethan slipped through a side door, every nerve alert. Ahead, in a vast hall lit by candles dripping black wax, robed figures knelt in a circle. Their guttural invocation grew louder with each passing second. At the center stood a crimson altar, its surface slick with something dark and ancient. Angela lay bound before it, her head bowed, her spirit on the verge of collapse. Ethan's heart clenched at the sight. He pressed himself against the cold stone wall, gathering strength. One chance remained, to interrupt the ritual, to save her, and to stop Mammon before the world was lost. With a silent breath, he stepped into the flickering light and prepared to face the unholy host. The fate of every living soul depended on what happened next. They came in two kinds, brutal and terrifying, or sly and duplicitous, but all shared the same ambition, to serve the dragon and herald Man-Meng's birth. Resistance was futile, the odds stacked against any who stood in their way. In heaven, Archangel Gabriel clandestinely tuned his celestial harmonies. In hell, Man-Meng, the infernal prince, prepared to claim his throne. With such leaders on both fronts, how could they ever fail? The advantage was theirs, and even devils and demons trembled at the thought of lagging behind the dragon's power. Deep in the asylum's hidden wing, Ethan found Angela. She looked on the brink of death. Floating in a vast tank of water, her skin was so swollen and pale that she might have been a corpse. Her eyes, empty, unfocused, suggested her spee, Eret had already slipped away. Across her exposed abdomen, a massive hand bulged from beneath the flesh, as if straining to break free. It was Man-Meng's hand. He was already inside her, awaiting Gabriel's arrival with the gun of Longinus. Once Gabriel cut open her belly, Man-Meng would at last be born into the world. A crushing despair filled Ethan's chest. He knew, helplessly, that there was nothing he could do to stop it. Ethan's vision swam with pain, but he refused to yield. He couldn't let Angela suffer, not when he still had breath in his lungs. Summoning every last ounce of will, he cocked his battered sidearm and strained to stand. Then Gabriel materialized, stepping through a haze of dust and shadows. In her hands glinted the legendary Longinus gun. Her stride was slow, deliberate, an unspoken challenge, each step bringing her closer to Angela. Ethan froze, struck by the cold intensity in Gabriel's eyes. She regarded Angela as one might inspect a dying insect, detached and utterly ruthless. "Gabriel," Ethan rasped, his voice cracking. At the sight of Gabriel, the horde of demons and fiends that had been circling the ruined plaza recoiled. Even creatures of pure malice instinctively sensed her power. A few attempted to snarlingly bellow threats, baring jagged teeth, but Gabriel paid them no heed. She had no time for posturing. Strength spoke for itself, and she intended to silence all opposition. "The appointed hour has arrived," Gabriel said, her tone flat and unhurried. "Children of hell, come forth." She raised the Longinus gun. Legend said it was the weapon that once slew gods, a device capable of overriding fate itself. In her grip, it promised victory. Out of her hands, it spelled annihilation. From the shadows stepped Constantine, his crimson cloak billowing. The demons howled with savage delight at his appearance. "Kill him!" they roared in unison. Ethan tightened his grip on his sidearm. Angela's trembling form lay just a few feet away. He knew he could be crushed between Gabriel's unstoppable march and the demonic onslaught closing in, yet he would stand. Even if it cost him his life, he would protect her. He would not let fate be rewritten without a fight. "Stop! You can't kill him!" Man-Meng, Hell's own heir, bellowed across the battlefield, his roar rattling the ranks of demons. "If you dare touch me, I'll end it all myself," Ethan called out without hesitation. For a moment, the demons and devils froze. No one expected him to threaten suicide. Gabriel looked on in bemusement at the flustered fiends. "No wonder you can't even handle a single human." "If you can't kill him," Gabriel snapped, "then at least restrain him, you idiots." At the command, the demons' eyes gleamed with renewed purpose. They advanced, eager to subdue Ethan. "Don't even think about it." Ethan shrugged off his windbreaker, revealing a lean, pale torso streaked with arcane sigils and concentric magic circles. "These runes? One wrong move, and they'll kill me instantly. Who's feeling brave now?" He snapped open a pack of Silka cigarettes, lit one, and drew in a slow, defiant drag, smoke curling around him like a shield. Around him, the demons hesitated, caught between obeying Gabriel's orders and fearing the lethal traps drawn on Ethan's skin. Ethan exhaled, the ember at the cigarette's tip glowing like a challenge. "Anyone else want to give it a try?" Silence fell over the infernal horde as they reconsidered their strategy. No one was eager to play with a live grenade. "If it's holy light, magic, or some other trick meant to throw me off, one misstep in my powers and I'll go up in flames. Hell, I'd even blow myself to bits over the tiniest ache." Gabriel stared at Ethan, trying to read the truth in his eyes. But deception was his greatest weapon, one that could fool even the first fallen, and she'd never seen a magic circle like the one engraved on his skin. As an archangel steeped in ancient Judaic lore, she'd studied every known sigil. This one possessed a flawless symmetry and a natural, almost live-in texture. nothing like the clumsy forgeries demons sometimes scrawl. The assembled devils hesitated, wary of striking first. Unfazed, Ethan stepped forward, his gait confident and unhurried. "Move aside," he called, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Unless you're looking to pay a toll for crossing me." He swept an arm out, shoving the nearest demon aside as he continued his march, every eye fixed on the strange, glowing symbol that bound him, and warned them all of the power he wielded. Chapter 698, A Slap in the Face. Demons and devils writhed in unprecedented chaos around the ritual center. One by one, they were shoved aside by Ethan, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of fury and humiliation, like creatures forced to swallow rancid bile. Though resentment burned in their eyes, none dared defy him. The success of their new master's birth depended on Ethan's cooperation. Gabriel, the majestic archangel, watched from a distance. His normally serene features tightened with disgust as Ethan, feared throughout hell as a ruthless mortal, advanced with cold confidence. Gabriel felt as if he'd been cursed through 8 lifetimes, doomed to cross paths with this scoundrel at the worst possible moment. All he wanted was to slip away, to leave this blasphemous tableau behind. But pride held him fast. An archangel could not simply abandon his post, no matter how distasteful the company. Ethan strode forward, oblivious to Gabriel's judgment. He scanned the throng of infernal creatures, his dark eyes calculating every threat, every weakness. With each step, the gathered demons recoiled, uncertain whether to flee or fight, yet bound by unspoken oaths, they remained. Then, in a single, ignominious instant, his supremacy toppled. He failed to notice a slick trail of demonic sludge pooling at his feet. With an abrupt slip, Ethan's legs shot out from under him, and he crashed to the ground in a graceless heap. Silence fell over the assembled throngs, and even the air seemed to still in disbelief. The great Ethan, king of mortal defiance, had been undone by nothing more than a patch of oozing slime. A low, collective murmur rippled through the demons. Gabriel's lips curved into a faint, wry smile. The ritual might still succeed, but for the first time, the human's champion lay humiliated before his enemies, his fall a crushing reminder that pride, even in the strongest mortal, can pave the way to catastrophe. The sudden turn of events left every demon and devil in the ward frozen in shock. They stared, mouths agape, as the human who had once sent shivers through their spines now lay sprawled and humiliated on the stone floor. In hell's blistering heat, where magma was the only true liquid, slime was a rare and highly prized substance. Yet Ethan, oblivious to its value, had stepped straight onto a puddle of it and lost his footing. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber. It sounded as though Ethan's spine had splintered. He gripped the floor in agony, every nerve alight with excruciating pain. A guttural scream tore from his throat, raw, desperate, and terrifying enough to chill any onlooker. "No, it's over," he gasped, voice breaking with fear. A collective gasp rippled through the demons. They all remembered Ethan's grim warning. He'd inscribed a magic circle upon his flesh, promising that if he ever felt true harm, the runes would trigger a massive explosion, destroying him, and attracting Lucifer in person to claim his fragrant soul. The possibility of that cataclysm, and the Lord of Hell's direct involvement, sent them stumbling backward in panic. Silence fell, heavy with dread. If Ethan's circle truly detonated, there was no telling what havoc would be unleashed upon the infernal realm. At that moment, one thought consumed them all. Escape. If they didn't run now, when would they? The hospital erupted into chaos. Devils and demons bolted for the exits, terrified of being caught by Lord Lucifer in hot pursuit. No one wanted to learn firsthand what happened to those the boss thought unworthy. It would surely be a fate worse than anything the mortal world could devise. With Ethan lying motionless on the floor, who dared linger? Even Gabriel and Mammon, the son of Hell, trembled as they stared at him. Gabriel's knuckles whitened around the spear of Longinus, her only weapon against Lucifer. But with Ethan down, she felt utterly helpless. Time seemed to stand still as both she and Mammon held their breath, waiting for the final blow. Then, to their astonishment, Ethan did not disintegrate. He pushed himself up, wincing as his hand pressed against his spine. Pain radiated through him in fierce waves, but no bone had shattered. And as he rose, he realized with a cold clarity that his true identity and his reckless gambit had been exposed. He would never risk everything like this again. Ethan's so-called magic circle was nothing more than an elaborate diversion, designed to baffle the demons and devils, all of whom had only a rudimentary grasp of true arcane lore, and above all to hoodwink the aloof Archangel Gabriel. Every rune, every twist of energy in the pattern was chosen precisely because Gabriel wouldn't recognize it, and crucially, wouldn't bother to learn it. For a moment, his plan unfolded exactly as he'd hoped. The demons recoiled in confusion, and Gabriel herself hesitated, her usually unshakable composure faltering. But Ethan hadn't counted on his own arrogance, or on the pull of his curiosity. He found himself fixated on Monmeng, the hellspawn crouching at the edge of the circle. Instead of sealing the trap and slipping away, he lingered, studying the creature's flickering crimson eyes. In that instant of overconfidence, the illusion began to crumble. Realization struck the gathered fiends like a thunderbolt. They saw through Ethan's ruse, and fury erupted in their hearts. One by one, demons and devils closed ranks around the magician, their snarls echoing through the chamber. They felt insulted, demeaned by having been turned into pawns, and they would not forgive the deceit. Above the rising roar, Gabriel's wings unfurled in a rush of brilliant light. The fear she'd once carried at the sight of Ethan's false wards had burned away, replaced by a white-hot wrath. "Enough of your games, mortal," she intoned, voice ringing like steel. "Now you will pay for your treachery." At the center of the collapsing circle, Ethan staggered. The very ward meant to protect him flared chaotically beneath his feet. He realized with a jolt of genuine panic that the hunters had become the hunted, and escape, he feared, might already be too late. Ethan froze as a commanding voice thundered down the hospital corridor. "Get out of my way!" At that roar, even the demons quailed. They parted before her, like the waters of a storm-swept sea. Gabriel strode forward, radiant and terrible, her wings tucked behind her in sharp, disciplined angles. At the sight of Constantine attempting to slip away, she seized him by the collar before he could vanish into the crowd. She held him up until his stained face, bruised, bloodied, exhausted, was inches from hers. "What else do you have to say?" Her tone was pure contempt, each word laced with scorn. Constantine swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "Gabriel, please. I don't want to hear it." With that, she began to strike him, her hand moving faster than the eye could follow. Crack! 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 The echoes rang off the sterile walls, each blow driving more humiliation and agony into the fallen angel's face. His cheeks ballooned under her unrelenting fury, blood spattering from his split lips, teeth clattering to the floor. Ethan watched, heart pounding, as Constantine sagged in her grip. He couldn't tear his gaze away. Each crack of flesh against flesh felt like a blow to his own chest. Finally, Gabriel released him, letting him slump to the ground in a trembling heap. Ethan let out a slow breath. It was terrifying, and undeniably excruciating to watch. The crack of Gabriel's lashes rang out like a brewing storm. Every demon and devil in the chamber froze, stunned by what they saw. The Archangel Gabriel, Celestia's own High Commander, fiercely striking Ethan, a mere human mage. To them, Ethan was none other than a lowly mortal magician. Gabriel was an exalted warrior of heaven. That such a being would be so thoroughly humiliated by a human, and worse, had been deceived by him, was almost too much to comprehend. Gabriel's wrath was fueled by her own shock and fury. An archangel had been tricked by a human. She struck Ethan relentlessly for more than 10 minutes, her wings quivering with each blow. Though he bore no divine protection, Ethan's resolve did not crumble. Even as pain coursed through him, he kept his gaze fixed on Gabriel, silently summoning every last shred of willpower. Watching from the sidelines, Mammon, Prince of Hell, shifted in his throne. At first, he reveled in the spectacle. Not long ago, Ethan's summoning circle had shaken him with dread. Now the human lay battered at the feet of an archangel. A broad grin split Mammon's face. He finally understood why his father had been so vigilant about guarding Ethan's soul. Such a treacherous creature deserved nothing but the harshest punishment. But as the minutes dragged on, Mammon's initial satisfaction gave way to impatience. The archangel seemed determined to break Ethan completely, yet a strange tension lingered in Gabriel's stance. And somewhere deep in hell, the first threads of a far grander design were beginning to stir. Chapter 699, Manmon, Son of Hell. The empty hall trembled with the cold power in Manmon's voice. Son of Hell and Torturer Supreme. His summons rang like a hammer against Gabriel's chest. She lifted her head, eyes alight with a storm of anger and helplessness, and glanced at Constantine, who lay crumpled and bleeding on the dais. It should have horrified her, yet a strange, guilty thrill coursed through her veins. "That's enough, Lord Gabriel," Manmon barked, impatience sharpening his tone. "The ceremony's concluded. We'll continue our entertainment later." Gabriel inhaled slowly, forcing down her resentment. She returned Manmon's gaze with a frostbitten look, and then addressed the surrounding horde of demons and devils. "Keep watch on him," she ordered. "No surprises, no suicide attempts to draw on Lucifer. Once the formalities are complete, you may do as you wish." A chorus of snarls and savage grins spread through the assembly. They surged forward, eyes glinting with bloodlust, eager to unleash the next wave of torment on the broken man at their feet. Ethan lay unconscious on the ground. Blood and bruises streaked his face. His eyes, once bright with wisdom and courage, were now hollow with despair. He knew he'd fallen into a hopeless predicament, one from which no savior could come. Deep within the abyss, Manmeng's eyes flared with crimson fire. The legendary Son of Hell had waited far too long. The world's bustle and splendor, its loves and hatreds, had become irresistible temptations. Now his dark yearning could no longer be contained. He would cross into the mortal realm and, with his boundless power, remake it in his own image. His voice slithered up through Angela's womb and stabbed into Gabriel's ears, ecstatic and charged with anticipation, as though heralding a grand infernal festival. "Quickly," Manmeng commanded, his words like searing hellfire. "Use the spear of Longinus. Rend her womb and let her divine blood guide my rebirth." Gabriel, once an angel, now the lone guardian standing against this abomination, stared at Manmeng's twisted, grotesque form. Loathing churned in her heart. "I know," she replied, her tone icy and unwavering. Gabriel hefted the Longinus gun, an artifact of legend, said to pierce all that was evil. But in this moment, it had become the very vessel through which Manmeng would enter their world. He drew a steadying breath, raised the gun, and drove it deep into Angela's abdomen. In that instant, time itself seemed to shatter. Space, sound, everything hung suspended. Dozens of stunned witnesses held their collective breath, eyes locked on the gash opening in Angela's belly, expecting the prophesied miracle to emerge. Instead, nothing touched with innocence or light appeared. From the wound burst a churning torrent of pitch-black energy, pouring outward in a living tide of malevolence. It swelled, filling the chamber with a darkness so absolute it threatened to snuff out every spark of life. Then came the laughter, Manmeng's laughter, rolling through the stillness like the roar of thunder. It rang with boundless pride and ruthless triumph, as if the void itself had triumphed. In that mirthless roar lay the joy of conquest, and in his eyes blazed the rapture of victory. If Ethan succeeds, he will ascend as the new master of this world. A fresh chapter will dawn, and his name will be engraved forever in the annals of history. Black mist coils across the sky like boiling ink, turning the once blue heavens into a roiling void. A fierce wind roars through the air, its howl more savage than any beast's cry, filling the world with a crushing sense of dread. Within that darkness, the miasma shifts and writhes, condensing into grotesque shapes as though guided by unseen hands. With each pulse of dark energy, a titanic form begins to take shape. Towering above all, the creature's presence warps reality itself. From its forehead corkscrew, a pair of spiraling horns, twisting toward the heavens like jagged spires. Its limbs and torso soar skyward, each movement threatening to shatter the earth below. Ropes of muscle ripple across its body, each knot bound with explosive force. Enough power, it seems, to crumble mountains at a thought. 10 talon-like claws extend from its massive hands, their edges glinting with a cold, merciless light. Behind it, a pair of broad, bat-like wings unfurl, blotting out what little light remains. The very air trembles under the weight of this demon's arrival, and when it finally steps forward, the ground shudders as if to warn all who stand in Ethan's path. Ethan's bat-like wings unfurled with an aura of death, each feather as sharp as a black blade. They trembled in the air, shedding tendrils of inky energy that coalesced into ominous blossoms. Those swirling obsidian flowers seemed almost alive, swaying on the wind, exuding a heady, irresistible perfume laced with lethal intent, as if celebrating Ethan's true arrival. At last, his full identity stood revealed. A towering presence, impossible to face without feeling small and vulnerable. Sulfur-scented heat radiated from him in waves, warping and shimmering the air as though intent on melting everything before him. The chamber became a blazing furnace. Steam hissed and roared as though the very atmosphere was being boiled. His sheer force of will pressed against every breath. Draw nearer, and it felt as though his power would swallow you whole. When he released that power at full strength, the sky itself ignited. Drenched in crimson fire, the world was bathed in a blood-red glow that burned as fiercely as Ethan's overwhelming might. The very air seemed to solidify around them, so dense and oppressive that each breath felt like inhaling lead. A distant, crackling echo, like invisible bones snapping, reverberated in everyone's ears. At the center of it all stood Mammon, his arrival sending a shockwave through the realm, as though heralding an unprecedented disaster. Even the most haughty demons and devils, those who once swaggered with unchecked pride, now trembled before him. They knew him as the scion of hell they had long worshipped, and they felt deeply honored to witness this moment. One by one, they fell to their knees, voices ringing out across the chamber in reverent chorus. "Mammon!" Their cries rolled through the suffocating air, heavy with awe and devotion. Chapter 700, City of Angels? City of Hell. Mammon surveyed the kneeling horde with cold disdain. Every demon and devil before him trembled beneath his icy glare, faces contorted in a mixture of awe and terror as they awaited Hell's scion to speak again. Still, their worship was insufficient. He inhaled sharply, as if the very air beneath his throne were unworthy. "Address me properly," he snarled, voice low and deadly. "I am the Lord of Hell." His words cut through the cavernous hall like blades forged in the abyss. Silence fell so absolute, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Then, from the front row, a lone demon dared to reply, voice quivering. "Hail to you, great scion of hell, Mammon." No sooner had the word escaped the demon's lips than Mammon's cruel eyes locked onto him. With a swift motion, he stretched out a massive hand, talon-like fingers curling around the unlucky creature. The palm's skin was rough and chiseled, as if carved from black granite, yet it closed around the demon effortlessly. A strangled cry echoed through the hall. Under the weight of Mammon's grip, the creature went still, its bones crunching like fallen twigs. The assembled devils convulsed in horror, their frantic whispers swallowed by the demon lord's roar. "Remember your place. Worship me, and only me, as the Lord of Hell." The demon writhed helplessly in Mammon's grip, its every struggle thwarted by the iron strength of his hand. A cruel smile curled the corners of his mouth, eyes alight with contempt for life and an insatiable hunger for power. He opened his jaws wide. Inside, an abyss of darkness and ruin seemed to yawn, and swallowed the creature whole, as if savoring a rare delicacy. Then came the crunch. Bones shattered beneath his teeth in a sound so sharp it rang through the caverns of hell itself. Every demon and devil within earshot froze, their hearts hammering in their chests. They knew, in that instant, that Mammon would never be content with the lowly title of Son of Hell. His ambitions reached far higher, hungering for absolute dominion and worship. A tense silence fell. Then, as if on cue, the trembling voices of countless fiends rose together. "Hail to you, great Lord of Hell," they cried, their words swelling with awe and dread. They bowed low, offering their souls in homage, hoping to appease the newly crowned sovereign of the underworld. Beneath Mammon's smirk, the horde surged like a living tide, demons and devils pressing forward in a dark celebration of their lord's terrifying might. They fell to their knees, voices raised in prayer as though they meant to pour every ounce of faith into this dread god. Their cries echoed through the abyss like rolling waves of terror. Mammon listened, a flicker of satisfaction igniting in his crimson gaze. He knew these demons and devils were wholly his, their devotion no longer born merely of fear and awe, but of hunger for power and the promise of a new world. "Go," he rumbled, voice low and unforgiving as the void itself, "and tell the mortals, we have come." At that command, the foul legions surged outward like a black tide. Their twisted silhouettes loomed in the darkness, each one a living envoy from the nether realms. Beneath their feet, the earth cracked open, hell's gates torn wide by Mammon's own will. From those jagged rifts poured a plague of dead air, creeping across the lands with malignant purpose. Cold and venomous, it gnawed at every hill and valley, seeped into every building's walls, and clung to the living like a promise of oblivion. Under the weight of that dead air, the once bustling streets of Los Angeles fell eerily silent. Pedestrians halted in their tracks, eyes wide with terror. No one knew exactly what had happened, but an invisible force pressed down on them, stealing their breath. There was no time to flee. That malignant atmosphere enveloped every living thing, driving people to scream as their bodies melted into gelatinous pools on the cracked pavement. Beneath their feet, the ground trembled as if something colossal was waking from the city's depths. The quakes grew more violent by the second, tearing buildings apart. Overhead, an angry sky roiled with thunder. Jagged bolts of lightning slashed through the clouds, briefly illuminating a metropolis in ruins. On the rooftop of a shattered skyscraper stood Ethan, surveying the scene with cold satisfaction. His eyes glowed with excitement at the havoc unfolding below. This, he knew, was only the beginning. With the power he now wielded, he would drag the entire world into his own brand of hell. In a voice that thundered across the sky, Mammon declared, "By my name, a new hell shall rise here. The dead shall fall, decay and perish, becoming my power." No sooner had his words faded than the earth beneath the city split open. From every widening crack seeped a choking miasma of death, swiftly suffusing every street and alley. Any creature caught in its path screamed as rot ate through flesh, reducing bodies to gelatinous husks. Withered and corroded, their souls were dragged screaming into the infernal depths, bound forever as Mammon's slaves. Each life extinguished fed his strength, pain and despair transmuting into raw, unholy power. Where bustling crowds once hustled, only hideous demons and devils now prowled. They burst from the darkness in frenzied swarms, devouring every living thing they could reach. Their twisted silhouettes leaped across ruined buildings, their bestial roars shaking the night sky and plunging the city into unending terror. In mere moments, legions of fiends poured through the rifts between worlds, forming a vast, unstoppable army of hell. Like a dark tide, the hellish creatures Mammon had summoned swept through every street and alley, shrouding the city in utter blackness. Rivers of flame and choking plumes of smoke gouged the sky, their sulphurous stench blotting out the moon and stars. Dawn could not come to this night. It grew darker even as chaos reigned below. The very earth trembled and groaned, as though the cataclysm itself was burrowing up from the city's depths. From the sewers, from cracked foundations, the beasts emerged in a maelstrom of snapping jaws and flailing claws, demolishing all that dared stand in their path. Their roars shook buildings to their cores, casting once bustling avenues into pandemonium. Terrified citizens poured into the streets, seeking refuge wherever they could, homes, cellars, even collapsed ruins. But no hiding place was safe under Mammon's sway. Every escape route ended in darkness, every shelter became a tomb. Life itself seemed to vanish, snuffed out by the demon lord's malevolent decree. Only devils and fiends remained, cavorting amidst the wreckage and feasting on the terror they had unleashed. In the ash and ruin, they reveled in Mammon's gift of power and glory, their guttural laughter an anthem to the city's doom. Chapter 701, Internal Conflict. Over the years, Manmeng's power has grown unstoppable, his name whispered as a legend no one can ignore. His voice, low and magnetic as an ancient curse, carries the weight to reshape entire worlds. Now he stands atop the shattered remains of a once thriving metropolis, surveying the devastation he himself unleashed. Glass and steel skyscrapers lie collapsed in heaps of rubble, the busy streets heaved under piles of concrete and twisted rebar. Nothing stirs but the wind, heavy with the stench of death and despair, as though the air itself mourns the city's lost glory. Yet for Manmeng, this ruin is merely a stepping stone. His ambition forms a black hole that devours every scrap of power within reach. He dreams not just of conquest, but of remaking the world in his own image, an endless kingdom of shadow and suffering. He seeks to bend all living beings to his will, stamping out hope until only darkness remains. Raising his arms, he summons the wellspring of negative energy that courses through the earth. Despair and fear crackle like lightning. Hatred, jealousy, greed, and lust churn in a storm of pure malice. These emotions, once scattered, now surged together in inky torrents, swallowing the horizon and blotting out any stray light of hope. Soon, he whispers to the gathering dark, the world itself will kneel before him, and in that final silence, only his voice will remain. Ethan stood at the heart of the abyss, the swirling vortex of damned souls twisting reality itself. He reached out with his will, drawing in the raw, corrupting energies that drove mortals mad. One by one, billions of tortured spirits, each a victim of his own past cruelties, were forced into his flesh and bone. Their boundless hatred and aching curses scorched him like living fire, but instead of destroying him, they fused with his essence, amplifying his power beyond anything he had ever known. As the spirits poured in, Ethan's form began to shift. He grew both larger and darker, his skin rippling with an otherworldly sheen that repelled the bravest glance. A pair of glowing red eyes took shape beneath a brow of shadow, granting him sight into every hidden corner of night. His voice dropped to a guttural timbre that echoed like a tolling bell from the deepest pits of hell itself. No longer merely a tormented son of the underworld, Ethan had ascended to the throne of damnation. His aura pulsed with absolute authority. He could drown the living in paralyzing terror or extinguish them with a single thought. As the newly crowned Lord of Hell, Ethan now commanded the fate of souls, his reach unchallenged, his power eternal. Ethan had gained powers he'd never known as Lucifer's son, but now, as the newly anointed Lord of Hell, he wielded the full authority of the infernal realms. With every dark privilege at his command, he felt certain he could eclipse his father. Even if Lucifer realized something was amiss, slipped away from hell, and re-emerged among mortals, he would find himself completely outmatched. In ancient lore, souls were the currency of higher demons, traded and exchanged in hell's depths to sustain its unique economy. But when that economy shatters, when the very world warps into a brand new hell, the old order collapses. In this distorted domain, Ethan had risen as the ultimate capitalist. He controlled untold legions of souls and used them as bargaining chips to consolidate his dominion. Seated upon a throne forged from swirling shadows and licking flames, Ethan's eyes gleamed with ruthless ambition. Around him, evil power thrummed like a living thing, filling him with dark satisfaction. This world belonged wholly to him, and he would reign supreme over his newly forged hell. "Thank you, Gabriel," Manmeng said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. His obsidian eyes, deep as an abyss, remained fixed on the archangel before him. Gabriel tilted her head, her gaze shining with divine light as though she could peer into every corner of his soul. A faint, enigmatic smile curved her lips, part contempt, part eagerness for the battle to come. "You're welcome," she replied coolly. In a single fluid motion, she lifted the head of the spear of Longinus. Pure, radiant light spiraled around it, forging the shaft of the lance from nothingness. Behind her, 6 immaculate white wings unfurled, each feather glowing with celestial brilliance that made the air tremble. Manmeng's confidence wavered as he studied the weapon. He knew the truth. Without its full body, only the holy nail at its tip remained, and that fragment alone was indestructible. A relic said to slay gods themselves. A mocking grin curled on his lips. "Is that broken spearhead truly all you bring to this fight?" he taunted, his voice laced with arrogance. "Do you think it makes you my match?" Ethan's gaze was locked on the spear of Longinus in Gabriel's hand, the legendary relic said to pierce the heart of a god. Gabriel offered no reply to Manmeng's taunts. Her eyes were steely and unyielding, as though she had seen straight through his hypocrisy and arrogance. Instead, she silently raised the spear, its tip igniting in a blinding radiance that seemed to pulse with divine power. At her signal, a surge of holy energy burst from the spearhead, rippling outward like a violent storm and warping the very air around them. That raw force swept across the chamber, leaving an oppressive weight in its wake, an unmistakable testament to the spear's might. Manmeng's face went pale. He felt the surge hammering against him, the kind of terror one reserves for the truly unstoppable. He drew himself up, blade in hand, but before he could speak, Gabriel's voice rang out, cool and contemptuous. "You can try." There was no fear in her tone, only absolute confidence. They had once been allies, bound by the contract that had summoned Manmeng into this world. Now that their agreement was fulfilled, each was free to act on his own behalf. If Manmeng hesitated, Gabriel would have found it suspicious. With a reluctant snarl, Manmeng lunged. His knife gleamed as it sliced through the charged air. Gabriel didn't flinch. Spear poised, she met his attack head-on, the light from Longinus dancing along her blade as the two powers collided in a clash that would decide their fates. Manmon's eyes burned with greed as he faced Gabriel. His pit of hell still lacked a soul of sufficient weight, and Gabriel's archangelic essence was exactly what he needed. With such a prize in his grasp, he believed he could finally ascend into heaven itself and stand toe-to-toe with his father, Lucifer. Driven by this ambition, Manmon sprang into action. He swung his colossal axe in a savage arc. The blade dripped with a foul black aura, as though it had devoured every scrap of light and vitality, forged from the bones of angels, demons, and fallen devils, and further tainted by the churning energies of hell. It was a weapon of unspeakable terror. Gabriel merely smiled, ice in her expression. With a gentle twist of her wrist, she raised the spear of Longinus and unleashed a torrent of divine power from its tip. In the next heartbeat, that holy force smashed into Manmon's axe in a deafening explosion. The shockwave rippled outward, bending the very air around them, and for a moment, even time itself seemed to tremble under the weight of their clash.